Hello everyone and welcome. This is Fanfic Heaven speaking. We have handpicked a wonderful story for today. What if Petunia took Harry to Gringotts at age 5 and the Goblins arrested Dumbledore for kidnapping? New videos drop regularly, so subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. And don't forget to like if you enjoy the story. Shall we begin? Here goes. Chapter 1. The letter in the blanket. The cupboard under the stairs was dark and cramped, but 5-year-old Harry Potter had long since grown accustomed to the spiders that occasionally skittered across his threadbare blanket. Outside his small sanctuary, the Dursley household bustled with the sounds of breakfast preparation. The sizzle of bacon, the clatter of plates, and Aunt Petunia's shrill voice calling for Dudley to come downstairs filled the air. Up! Get up now! Petunia's bony knuckles rapped against his door, making the small hinges rattle. I need you to watch the bacon. Don't you dare let it burn. Harry rubbed sleep from his eyes, fumbling for his glasses in the dim light. They were held together with tape where Dudley had broken them, creating a spiderweb pattern across the right lens. I'm up, Aunt Petunia, he called back softly, his small voice barely carrying through the door. He quickly changed into Dudley's old clothes, which hung from his thin frame like elephant skin. A plain gray t-shirt that reached his knees and jeans that needed to be rolled up multiple times at the ankles. His wild black hair stuck up at odd angles, no matter how many times Aunt Petunia tried to flatten it with a wet comb. When he emerged from the cupboard, his aunt was already in the kitchen, arranging flowers on the table. Her long neck craned to peer through the window at the neighbors across the street, lips pursed in disapproval. Hurry up with the bacon, she snapped, not bothering to look at him. Everything must be perfect for Dudley's first day of proper school. Harry climbed onto the small step stool by the stove and carefully flipped the bacon strips. The fat popped and hissed, sending tiny droplets of burning oil onto his exposed forearms. He bit his lip and said nothing. Complaining only made things worse. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen, his large frame filling the doorway as he rustled his newspaper importantly. Where's my coffee, boy? Coming, Uncle Vernon, Harry said, carefully sliding the bacon onto a plate while reaching for the coffee pot. The morning continued like any other in the Dursley household, Harry serving breakfast while Dudley counted his presents, Vernon complaining about work, and Petunia fussing over her diddykins, as though he were royalty rather than a spoiled child with chocolate smeared across his face. 36 presents, Dudley announced suddenly, his pudgy face flushing red. That's 2 less than last year. You haven't counted Auntie Marge's present, darling, Petunia said quickly. It's here, under the big one from Mummy and Daddy. 37 then, Dudley said, his face screwing up dangerously. Harry, who could sense a Dudley tantrum brewing, quickly ate his small portion of breakfast, hoping to escape before the storm hit. Unfortunately, Vernon noticed his movement. Where do you think you're going? He demanded. The garden needs weeding before we leave for Dudley's first day. You're to stay with Mrs. Fig while we're gone. Harry's heart sank. Mrs. Fig was a batty old woman who lived 2 streets away and smelled of cabbage. Her house was filled with cats and old photo albums, which she insisted on showing Harry every time he visited. Can't I just stay here? Harry asked hopefully. And find the house in ruins when we return? I think not. Vernon's mustache quivered with indignation. Before Harry could respond, Dudley's tantrum reached full force. The large boy flipped his plate, sending eggs and bacon flying across the kitchen. One particularly greasy strip landed in Harry's hair. I want more presents. Dudley howled, his face turning purple in a way that reminded Harry of Uncle Vernon when he was especially angry. Petunia immediately rushed to console her son while Vernon glared at Harry as though the tantrum was somehow his fault. Harry, used to being the family scapegoat, quietly began cleaning up the mess while Petunia promised Dudley 2 more presents while they were out. You missed a spot, Vernon growled, pointing a sausage-like finger at a glob of egg beneath the table. Clean it properly or no meals for the rest of the day. Harry dropped to his knees, rage and helplessness bubbling inside him. It wasn't fair. Nothing about his life with the Dursleys was fair. As he scrubbed at the sticky egg, something strange happened. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop several degrees. The lights flickered overhead. And suddenly, every piece of glass in the kitchen, from the windows to Aunt Petunia's prized china cabinet, shattered simultaneously. In the ringing silence that followed, Harry looked up to see 3 shocked faces staring at him in horror. "What did you do?" Petunia whispered, her face ghostly white. "What did you do?" Harry shook his head frantically. "And nothing. I didn't do anything." But Vernon was already hauling him up by the collar of his oversized shirt, his face a dangerous shade of purple. "You freak. Just like your worthless parents." "Vernon." Petunia's voice was sharp, her eyes darting nervously to the windows where neighbors might be watching. "The neighbors will hear." Vernon released Harry with a forceful shove that sent him stumbling back into the wall. "Cupboard. Now. You'll stay there until we decide what to do with you." Harry, trembling with fear and confusion, backed toward his cupboard. He didn't understand what had happened or why they were blaming him. As he retreated, he heard Petunia whispering frantically to Vernon. "It's starting, Vernon. Just like with her. Those abnormalities. We'll stamp it out of him," Vernon growled. "I won't have one of those in my house." Harry closed the cupboard door behind him and sank onto his small mattress, drawing his knees up to his chest. What had he done? Why did strange things always happen around him? And what had Aunt Petunia meant about abnormalities, like his mother? Hours passed. The house grew quiet as the Dursleys left to take Dudley to his first day of school, leaving Harry locked in his cupboard. With nothing else to do, he pulled his thin blanket around his shoulders for comfort. Something crinkled. Harry froze, then cautiously felt along the edge of the blanket. There was a small bulge in the hemline that he'd never noticed before. Curious, he picked at the stitching until it gave way, revealing a folded piece of parchment hidden inside. With trembling fingers, Harry unfolded what appeared to be a letter written in emerald green ink. The handwriting was flowing and elegant, unlike anything he'd seen before. "My dearest Harry, if you're reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and something has gone terribly wrong with the plans your father and I made for your care. This letter is enchanted to reveal itself only to you when you first show signs of accidental magic, a sign your magical inheritance is awakening. Yes, Harry. You are a wizard, as I am a witch and your father was a wizard. Magic is your birthright and heritage. If you are not with Sirius Black, your godfather, the Longbottoms, or another magical guardian as specified in our will, then you must seek help immediately. Go to Gringotts, the wizard bank in London. Ask your guardian to take you to Diagon Alley. Any witch or wizard can show you how to get there from the Leaky Cauldron pub on Charing Cross Road. The Goblins of Gringotts respect inheritance law above all else and will help you claim your birthright as the Potter heir. Show them this letter and ask for an inheritance test. They will understand. Know that your father and I love you more than our own lives. We would never willingly leave you. Trust in yourself, Harry. Magic is in your blood. All my love, Mum, Lily Potter." Harry read the letter 3 times, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. Magic. Witches. Wizards. A godfather. It was impossible, and yet, it explained so much. The strange incidents that always seemed to happen around him. The way his hair grew back overnight after Aunt Petunia had cut it horribly short. The time he'd somehow ended up on the school roof when Dudley and his friends were chasing him. And the Dursleys knew. They'd always known. That's why they called him a freak, why they hated him so much. Harry carefully refolded the letter and tucked it into the waistband of his too large pants. He needed to get to this Gringotts place, but how? The Dursleys would never take him to London, especially not after what had happened this morning. For hours, Harry sat in the darkness, turning over possibilities in his mind. When he finally heard the car pulling into the driveway, he had made his decision. It was risky, but it was the only plan he had. The front door opened, and Dudley's voice filled the house, complaining loudly about his teacher and demanding ice cream. Heavy footsteps approached the cupboard, and the lock clicked open. "Out," Vernon growled. "You'll make dinner and then it's back in here. No arguments." Harry stepped out, keeping his eyes downcast to hide any trace of defiance. "Yes, Uncle Vernon." In the kitchen, Petunia hovered nearby as Harry prepared dinner, her sharp eyes watching for any sign of the morning's strange occurrences. She jumped when Harry accidentally dropped a potato on the floor. "Sorry, Aunt Petunia," he said quietly, picking it up. Then, gathering all his courage, he added, "Can I ask you something?" Her lips pursed tightly. "What is it? Did my mum have strange things happen to her too?" The effect was immediate. Petunia's face drained of color, and her hand clutched at the counter for support. "Who told you that? What do you know?" Harry took a deep breath. "I found a letter. From my mum." "Impossible," Petunia hissed. "We burned everything. It was hidden in my blanket. The one I was wrapped in when I came here." Harry watched his aunt carefully. "She said I'm a wizard. Like my dad. And she was a witch." Petunia's eyes darted toward the living room where Vernon and Dudley were watching television. She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "Don't you dare speak of such abnormality in this house. Your parents got themselves blown up with their freakishness, and I won't have it here." "Blown up?" Harry's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "You told me they died in a car crash." "Keep your voice down." Petunia glanced nervously toward the living room again. "What else did this supposed letter say?" "That I need to go to a place called Gringotts. A bank in London." "It's important, Aunt Petunia." Petunia looked as though she'd swallowed something particularly sour. "Absolutely not. I won't have anything to do with those people ever again." Harry played his final card, the one he'd been thinking about all afternoon. "The letter said something's wrong. That I'm not with the people who are supposed to be taking care of me." He looked directly into his aunt's eyes. "If I go to this bank, maybe they can find who's really supposed to have me. Then I could leave. For good." Something flickered in Petunia's expression, hope, quickly hidden behind suspicion. "You'd leave? We'd be rid of you?" Harry nodded firmly, trying not to show how much her easy dismissal hurt, even after all these years. "That's what the letter says. Someone else is supposed to be taking care of me." Petunia stared at him for a long moment, conflict evident in her pinched expression. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. "Vernon has a business meeting in London tomorrow. I'll tell him Dudley and I are coming along for shopping." Her voice was cold, calculating. "If this bank can take you off our hands for good, then I'll do it. But this is the last connection I'll ever have with your freakish world. Do you understand?" Harry nodded quickly, hardly daring to believe his plan had worked. "Yes, Aunt Petunia. Now finish dinner, and not a word of this to Vernon. I'll handle him." She turned away, then paused. "And Harry? If this is some sort of trick, you'll wish you'd never found that letter." The following morning was a flurry of activity. Vernon grumbled about having to take his family to London but was somewhat placated by Petunia's assurances that she would take Dudley shopping for a reward for his excellent first day at school. Harry was relegated to the back seat, squished against the door by Dudley's substantial frame, the precious letter tucked securely in his pocket. The drive seemed endless. Dudley complained constantly, demanding to know why the freak had to come along. Vernon's neck grew increasingly red as London traffic thickened, and Petunia's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line as she checked her map of central London repeatedly. "Vernon, drop us at Charing Cross Road," Petunia instructed as they finally entered the city proper. Dudley and I will do our shopping while you're in your meeting. We can meet at that nice restaurant you like at 6. Vernon grunted his assent, too focused on navigating the unfamiliar streets to question why Petunia would want to shop in that particular area. When they finally pulled up to the curb, Petunia practically dragged Harry from the car, her bony fingers digging into his shoulder. "Be good for your mother, Dudders," Vernon called out the window before driving away. As soon as the car disappeared around a corner, Petunia's demeanor changed. She looked down at Harry with a mixture of distaste and determination. "Where exactly is this place supposed to be?" "The letter said something about a pub called the Leaky Cauldron on Charing Cross Road," Harry replied, looking around at the busy street. "It said we need to go through there to get to Diagon Alley, where the bank is." Petunia's lips thinned even further. "I remember that now. Lily mentioned it once." Her eyes scanned the storefronts, skipping over something between a bookshop and a record store. Then, with a small gasp, her gaze snapped back, focusing on what appeared to be a dingy pub that Harry hadn't noticed a moment before. "Is that it?" Harry asked, pointing. "Don't point." Petunia hissed, but she nodded curtly. "Come along, Dudley. Stay close to Mummy." Dudley, who had been eyeing a nearby ice cream shop, whined loudly. "But I don't want to go in there. It looks dirty." "Dudley, please," Petunia said, her voice strained. "Mummy needs to take care of something important, and then we'll get you a lovely present. And ice cream." The promise of gifts and treats temporarily placated Dudley, though he continued to cast suspicious glances at Harry as they approached the pub. Harry noticed that the people hurrying past on the busy street seemed not to notice the Leaky Cauldron at all, their eyes sliding from the bookshop to the record store as though the pub wasn't there. Inside, the Leaky Cauldron was dark and shabby. A few old women sat in a corner, drinking tiny glasses of sherry. A man in a tall purple hat was talking to the barman, who looked like a toothless walnut. The low buzz of conversation stopped as they entered, several pairs of curious eyes turning to stare at the oddly dressed Muggle woman and 2 children. Petunia drew herself up, clutching both boys' shoulders with white-knuckled hands. "We need to get to Diagon Alley," she announced to the room at large, her voice higher than usual. "To Gringotts Bank." The barman peered at them curiously. "Muggle family with a Hogwarts student? Bit young, ain't he?" Before Petunia could respond, Harry stepped forward. "Please, sir. I need to get to Gringotts. It's very important." Something about Harry's earnest tone, or perhaps the lightning-shaped scar partially visible beneath his unruly fringe, softened the barman's expression. "Right you are, lad. Tom's the name. I'll have someone show you through." He beckoned to a witch in emerald green robes who was sitting nearby. "Madam Clearwater, would you mind showing these folks to Diagon Alley? They need to visit Gringotts." The witch smiled kindly, though her eyes widened slightly as they landed on Harry. "Of course. Follow me, please." They followed her through the bar and out into a small, walled courtyard where there was nothing but a trash can and a few weeds. Dudley was clinging to Petunia's arm, his earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of the strange surroundings. The witch pulled out a slender wooden wand and tapped a brick on the wall 3 times. The brick she touched quivered, then wriggled, and a small hole appeared in the middle. The hole grew wider and wider, finally forming an archway large enough for even Dudley to pass through comfortably. "Welcome to Diagon Alley," Madam Clearwater announced with a flourish. "Gringotts is the big white building at the far end. You can't miss it." Petunia nodded stiffly, her face pale. "Thank you." As they stepped through the archway, Harry couldn't help but gasp. The narrow, cobbled street twisted and turned out of sight, lined with the most fascinating shops he'd ever seen. There were stores selling cauldrons, shops with barrels of bat spleens and eel's eyes, wobbling stacks of spell books, quills, and rolls of parchment. It was like stepping into another world, a world where his parents had belonged. Dudley, momentarily forgetting his fear, was gawking at a shop displaying racing brooms. "Mom! Look at that! They really do fly on brooms." "Hush, Dudley," Petunia said sharply, her gaze fixed straight ahead on their destination. Gringotts towered over the other shops, a snowy white building with burnished bronze doors. Standing beside those doors, wearing a uniform of scarlet and gold, was, "That's a goblin," Harry whispered, recalling his mother's letter mentioning the goblin bankers. The goblin was about a head shorter than Harry, with a clever face, a pointed beard, and very long fingers and feet. He bowed as they walked inside, his dark eyes lingering curiously on the strange trio, a pinch-faced muggle woman, a grossly overweight boy gaping at everything, and a small, thin boy with bright green eyes and a lightning scar partially hidden beneath his fringe. Inside, they faced a second pair of doors, silver this time, with words engraved upon them, "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed for those who take, but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there." "It's a warning," Harry murmured. "They don't like thieves." Petunia hushed him nervously as they passed through the silver doors into a vast marble hall. About 100 more goblins were sitting on high stools behind a long counter, weighing coins in brass scales, examining precious stones through eyeglasses, and scribbling in large ledgers. Dudley was now clinging to Petunia's leg, all traces of his usual bullying confidence gone. "Mummy, I want to go home," he whimpered. "Soon, Diddykins," Petunia promised, though she looked equally uncomfortable. She approached a free goblin at the counter, clearing her throat delicately. "Excuse me." The goblin looked up from the gems he was examining, his expression unimpressed. "Yes?" Petunia nudged Harry forward. "Tell him what you need," she hissed. Harry stepped up to the counter, having to stand on tiptoes to see the goblin properly. "Sir, my name is Harry Potter. My mother left me a letter saying I should come here for an inheritance test." The goblin's demeanor changed instantly. He leaned forward, studying Harry with new intensity. "Do you have this letter?" Harry nodded, pulling the parchment from his pocket and holding it out with a slightly trembling hand. The goblin took it carefully, reading it with narrowed eyes. When he finished, he looked back at Harry, then to Petunia. "And you are?" he asked sharply. "Petunia Dursley. The boy's aunt. His current guardian?" Petunia nodded stiffly. The goblin pressed a button on his desk, and immediately another goblin appeared at his side. They exchanged rapid words in a harsh, guttural language before the first goblin addressed them again. "I am Grip Hook. This matter requires immediate attention. Please follow Gornik to a private consultation room." Gornik, a slightly shorter goblin with a particularly wrinkled face, beckoned them to follow. Petunia hesitated, clearly regretting her decision to bring Harry here, but Dudley's whining had reached a fever pitch. "Mummy, I'm hungry. I want to go." "Dudley, please," Petunia pleaded, looking between her son and the impatient goblin. "Just a little longer. Perhaps the young master would prefer to wait in our children's area," Gornik suggested smoothly. "We have refreshments available for the children of our valued clients." Dudley's tantrum halted mid-wail. "Refreshments? Like cake?" "I believe chocolate cake is on today's menu," Gornik confirmed with what might have been a smile, though on his goblin face it looked rather fearsome. "I want cake," Dudley demanded. Petunia looked torn but eventually nodded. "Very well. Dudley can go to this children's area. But I'm staying with Harry." Gornik nodded, snapping his fingers. Another goblin appeared and escorted a suddenly cooperative Dudley away. Harry couldn't help but feel a twinge of amusement at how quickly Dudley's mood had changed at the mention of cake. They followed Gornik through a side door and down a richly decorated corridor to a room marked, "Inheritance Claims." Inside, the room was paneled in dark wood with a large desk dominating the center. Various strange instruments lined the walls, and ancient-looking books filled several shelves. Please be seated, Gornick instructed, gesturing to the chairs before the desk. Account manager Silverax will be with you shortly. Petunia perched nervously on the edge of her chair, her hands twisting in her lap. Harry sat more comfortably, filled with a strange combination of excitement and trepidation. This was it, the connection to his parents, to the truth about who he was. The door opened, and an older goblin entered, his silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and half-moon spectacles perched on his long nose. He carried a thick folder and what appeared to be a shallow stone basin. "Mr. Potter," he said, his voice surprisingly deep for his small stature. "I am Silverax, manager of the Potter accounts for the past 73 years. I have been expecting you, though not quite this soon." His sharp gaze turned to Petunia. "And Mrs. Dursley, I presume? Sister to Lily Evans Potter?" Petunia nodded stiffly. "Yes." Silverax placed the stone basin on the desk and opened the folder. "Mr. Potter, I understand you wish to undergo an inheritance test. Are you aware of what this entails?" Harry shook his head. "No, sir. My mother's letter just said I should ask for one." "Very well. The process is simple, if somewhat archaic." Silverax produced a small, silver knife from a drawer in the desk. 7 drops of your blood in the basin will activate the ritual. The results will appear on this parchment. He gestured to a sheet of thick, cream-colored parchment that he placed beside the basin. Petunia made a small noise of distress. "Blood? You're going to cut him?" "The cut heals instantly," Silverax assured her, though he looked distinctly uninterested in her concerns. "It is necessary for the magic to work." Harry looked at the knife with apprehension but held out his hand bravely. "I'll do it." Silverax nodded approvingly. "A small prick to your index finger will suffice." With a swift movement, Silverax pressed the knife to Harry's finger. Harry winced as the blade bit into his skin, but the goblin was right, it was just a small prick. 7 drops of ruby-red blood fell into the basin, and as the final drop hit the surface, the liquid began to glow with an eerie blue light. Silverax murmured words in the same guttural language Harry had heard earlier, passing his long fingers over the basin in intricate patterns. The blood in the basin swirled, then seemed to evaporate, leaving the basin dry. At the same time, words began to appear on the parchment as though an invisible hand were writing them. Harry leaned forward eagerly, Petunia reluctantly doing the same beside him. Inheritance test name, Harry James Potter. Parents, James Fleamont Potter, deceased, and Lily Evans Potter, deceased. Godparents, Sirius Black, magically bound, and Alice Longbottom, incapacitated. Blood status, half-blood magical guardian, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, self-appointed, illegal, legal guardian by magical will, Sirius Black, illegally imprisoned. Current guardian, Petunia Evans Dursley, illegal placement, magical bindings and blocks, 70% core block, placed by APWB Dumbledore, November 1, 1981, accidental magic suppression, placed by APWB Dumbledore, November 1, 1981, natural occlumency barrier, damaged by APWB Dumbledore, November 1, 1981, intelligence inhibitor, placed by APWB Dumbledore, November 1, 1981, health growth inhibitor, placed by APWB Dumbledore, November 1, 1981, foreign magic, Horcrux fragment, Tom Marvolo Riddle, placed October 31, 1981, blood wards, APWB Dumbledore, placed November 1, 1981, tied to Lily Potter's sacrifice, tracking charms, multiple, APWB Dumbledore, renewed annually, loyalty compulsions, keyed to APWB. Dumbledore and Weasley family, aversion charm, keyed to Slytherin house and dark magic, inherited titles, heir apparent, most ancient and noble house of Potter heir presumptive, most ancient and noble house of Black heir by conquest, most ancient and noble house of Slytherin vaults, Potter family vault, access at age 17 or emancipation, Potter trust vault, accessible now, Black family heir vault, Accessible with approval of Lord Black, Slytherin family vault, sealed by Gringotts due to contested claim, properties, Potter Manor, Wales, unplottable, Godric's Hollow Cottage, West Country, Ministry Historical Monument, Lily's Haven, Coastal Scotland, unplottable, Black Air Apartment, London, contingent on Lord Black's approval, 12% ownership stake in Diagon Alley Commercial Properties. Various international real estate holdings, see detailed addendum. Silverac's expression had grown increasingly grim as the parchment filled with information. When the writing finally stopped, he set the parchment down with deliberate care and fixed Petunia with a hard stare. "Mrs. Dursley, were you aware of the contents of James and Lily Potter's will?" Petunia shook her head, looking genuinely confused. "No. We were simply told the boy had to stay with us because of blood protection or something of the sort." "And who told you this?" "A man named Dumbledore. He left a letter with the boy on our doorstep." Petunia's voice had taken on a bitter edge. "Just left him there like a bottle of milk in the middle of the night." Silverac's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. "Left on a doorstep? In November?" He turned to Harry. "Mr. Potter, I must ask, how have you been treated in the Dursley household?" Harry shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Petunia's warning glare. Mr. Potter, I should inform you that lying to a goblin during an inheritance procedure is a serious offense," Silverac said gently but firmly. "Furthermore, the information you provide is protected by client confidentiality." Harry took a deep breath. "I sleep in the cupboard under the stairs. I do most of the chores. Sometimes I don't get meals if I do something wrong. Uncle Vernon and Dudley, they're not very nice to me." Petunia's face had gone deathly pale. "We took him in when no one else would. We fed him, clothed him, in cast-offs and table scraps." "By the looks of him," Silverac interrupted coldly. "Mrs. Dursley, under goblin law, the mistreatment of an heir to a noble house is a criminal offense." However, he raised a hand as Petunia opened her mouth to protest. "I suspect you were as much a victim of manipulation as young Mr. Potter." Harry was still staring at the parchment, struggling to process everything written there. "Sir," he said finally, looking up at Silverac, "what does all this mean? Who is Dumbledore? And what are these blocks?" Silverac folded his hands on the desk, his expression grave. "Albus Dumbledore is the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, chief warlock of the Wizengamot, our wizard government, and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. He is, perhaps, the most politically powerful wizard in Britain. And he put blocks on me? Why? That," Silverac said grimly, "is what I intend to find out." He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later, the door opened to admit another goblin. "Notify Director Ragnarok immediately. We have a Class 1 treaty violation involving the Potter heir. And dispatch a team to Azkaban to retrieve Sirius Black. We'll need Veritaserum authorization from the DMLE." The goblin's eyes widened, but he nodded sharply and hurried away. "Azkaban?" Harry asked. "What's that?" "The wizard prison," Silverac explained. "According to this test, your godfather was illegally imprisoned there. As your rightful guardian named in your parents' will, he should have received a trial. The fact that he didn't is highly suspicious." Petunia looked increasingly distressed. "What does this mean for us?" "For Harry? It means, Mrs. Dursley, that everything about Mr. Potter's placement with your family was illegal under both wizard and goblin law. The will was sealed against the explicit wishes of the Potters, Mr. Black was imprisoned without trial, and Mr. Potter was placed with Muggle relatives who were never supposed to have custody." Silverac's voice was cold. "Furthermore, the magical bindings placed on young Mr. Potter are tantamount to criminal assault under our treaties. Can they be removed?" Harry asked eagerly. "Yes, though the process will be painful. We have healers who specialize in such procedures. Silverax looked thoughtful. However, the Horcrux fragment is more concerning. That will require consultation with our curse-breaking department. The door opened again, and a goblin in elaborate armor stepped in, followed by 2 more similarly attired goblins. All 3 bowed deeply to Harry. Herr Potter, the first goblin said formally. I am Director Ragnarok. Gringotts stands ready to correct the injustices done to you and your family. Harry, not sure of the proper protocol, bowed awkwardly in return. Thank you, sir. A hint of approval flickered across Ragnarok's stern face. Account Manager Silverax has informed me of the situation. This is a clear violation of the Treaty of 1612, which explicitly forbids magical interference with inheritance matters. What happens now? Harry asked. First, we heal you and remove those abominable bindings, Ragnarok declared. Then, we retrieve your godfather from Azkaban and demand an immediate trial under Veritaserum, Truth Serum, he added, seeing Harry's confusion. As for Albus Dumbledore. Ragnarok's smile showed far too many sharp teeth. He will face goblin justice for violating our most sacred treaties. Goblin justice? Petunia asked faintly. Indeed, Mrs. Dursley. When a wizard interferes with goblin banking matters, particularly inheritance rights of noble houses, they forfeit their right to wizard justice. Ragnarok turned back to Harry. You will need to authorize these actions as the wronged party, Herr Potter. Harry looked between the goblins and his aunt, feeling overwhelmed but also, for the first time in his life, empowered. Someone was actually listening to him, actually caring about what had happened to him. I authorize it, he said firmly. Excellent. Ragnarok nodded to one of the armored goblins. Notify the wizard Aurors that we are invoking Article 7 of the Treaty of 1612. Albus Dumbledore is to be detained and brought to Gringotts to face charges of inheritance interference, line theft, and magical binding of a minor heir. The goblin bowed and hurried away. Mrs. Dursley, Ragnarok continued, as Mr. Potter's current guardian, though illegally appointed, your presence will be required for certain legal proceedings. However, given the circumstances, we can arrange accommodation for you and your son at the Leaky Cauldron until matters are resolved. Petunia looked torn between relief at the prospect of Harry being taken off her hands and fear of being further involved in the wizarding world. How long will this take? Several days, at minimum, Silverax replied. Legal matters involving noble houses are complex. However, rest assured that all your expenses will be covered by the Potter estate, as compensation for the inconvenience. The mention of financial compensation seemed to ease Petunia's concerns somewhat. She nodded reluctantly. Very well. But Dudley must be kept away from all this. She waved her hand vaguely at the magical instruments around the room. That can be arranged, Ragnarok agreed. He turned to Harry. Herr Potter, are you prepared to undergo the healing ritual today? I must warn you, it will be painful, and you will likely need several days to recover. Harry nodded without hesitation. Yes, sir. I want these blocks removed. Very good. Healer Bonecrusher will escort you to our ritual chambers. Ragnarok gestured to a female goblin who had just entered the room. Mrs. Dursley, Gornik will take you and your son to the Leaky Cauldron to arrange your accommodations. As Petunia was led away, looking distinctly uncomfortable at the prospect of staying in a wizard establishment, Harry followed Healer Bonecrusher down several winding corridors and deeper into the bank. They descended multiple staircases until the marble and granite of the upper levels gave way to rough-hewn stone that seemed to glow with faint, intricate runes. The ritual chambers are among our oldest constructions, Healer Bonecrusher explained, noticing Harry's fascination with the glowing symbols. The magic here has been building for centuries, making it an ideal place for complex healing rituals. They finally reached a circular chamber where 7 goblin healers were already arranging various instruments around a stone altar in the center. The altar itself was covered in what appeared to be cushioned leather and was inscribed with hundreds of tiny runes. Herr Potter, Healer Bonecrusher said formally, the ritual we are about to perform will systematically remove each magical binding placed upon you. The process will be painful as your magic attempts to re-establish its natural flow. Are you certain you wish to proceed? Harry gazed at the altar, fear momentarily flickering through him. But then he thought of everything he had just learned, about his parents, his godfather, his stolen inheritance, and the man who had orchestrated it all. His resolve hardened. I'm certain, he said firmly. Very well. Please remove your outer clothing and lie on the altar. We will begin immediately. As Harry followed her instructions, he couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few hours. That morning, he had been Harry Potter, the unwanted nephew sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs. Now, he was Herr Potter, about to reclaim his magical birthright. And somewhere in London, Aurors were preparing to arrest the most powerful wizard in Britain on charges of kidnapping the boy who lived. Chapter 2, Chains of Gold and Magic Pain. Pure, unfiltered agony coursed through Harry's small body as he lay spread-eagled on the stone altar. The 7 goblin healers stood in a perfect circle around him, their harsh voices chanting in their ancient tongue. Golden light pulsed from the runes carved into the altar, flowing into Harry's skin like liquid fire. Hold him steady. Healer Bonecrusher commanded as Harry's back arched violently. The first binding is breaking. Harry wanted to scream, but his voice was trapped in his throat. It felt as though someone had poured molten metal into his veins, burning away everything in its path. Behind his tightly shut eyelids, colors exploded like fireworks, brilliant reds, blinding whites, and deep, swirling purples. 70% core block dissolving, another healer announced, his long fingers tracing complex patterns in the air above Harry's chest. Magical backlash imminent. The warning came just seconds before a shockwave of raw magic exploded outward from Harry's body. The goblin healers were thrown back several steps, though they maintained their positions in the ritual circle. Glass vials shattered, and several of the floating crystal lights illuminating the chamber exploded in showers of sparks. Extraordinary, Healer Bonecrusher murmured, regaining her composure. The boy's core is unlike anything I've seen in a half-blood wizard. The chanting resumed, more urgent now. Harry felt something inside his mind crack, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Memories he didn't know he had suddenly flooded his consciousness, his mother singing him to sleep, his father transforming into a magnificent stag, a large black dog licking his face while he giggled uncontrollably. The memory blocks are dissolving, one of the healers announced. Moving to the intelligence inhibitor. Another wave of pain crashed over Harry, this one centered in his head. It felt as though someone were physically peeling layers from his brain. Strange knowledge began filtering through, words he shouldn't know, concepts that should have been beyond a 5-year-old's understanding, connections forming between ideas that had previously seemed unrelated. Growth inhibitor next, Healer Bonecrusher directed, her face glistening with sweat from the magical exertion. Brace yourselves, this one is physically tied to his bone structure. The pain that followed made the previous waves seem like gentle caresses. Harry's bones felt like they were simultaneously breaking and stretching, his muscles tearing and reforming. This time, he did scream, a high, keening wail that echoed off the stone walls of the ritual chamber. Blood trickled from his nose and ears as his body fought against years of magical suppression. Hold the containment. Healer Bonecrusher shouted as the runes on the altar began to glow white-hot. We're losing control of the feedback loop. The goblin healers redoubled their efforts, their chanting growing louder and more frantic. The very air in the chamber seemed to thicken with magic, making it difficult to breathe. Sweat poured from Harry's body, soaking the leather beneath him as his small form convulsed. And then they reached the final binding. Prepare for the Horcrux extraction, Bonecrusher ordered grimly. This is beyond standard healing magic. Director Ragnarok's authorization for blood magic is active. One of the healers produced a ceremonial dagger with a blade that seemed to drink in the light around it. With precise movements, he carved a series of runes into his own palm, then pressed the bleeding hand against Harry's forehead, directly over the lightning-shaped scar. Harry's world exploded into darkness. He was no longer in the ritual chamber but floating in an endless void. Before him stood a twisted, malformed creature, part child, part serpent, its red eyes burning with hatred and fear. "You cannot cast me out, boy," it hissed, its voice like broken glass scraping against stone. "I am Lord Voldemort. I am immortal. I am an abomination," a new voice interrupted, a woman's voice, fierce and protective. A figure materialized beside Harry, wreathed in golden light. Though her features were indistinct, Harry somehow knew exactly who she was. "Mum," he whispered. Lily Potter's spectral form placed herself between Harry and the fragment of Voldemort's soul. "You will not touch my son again, Tom," she declared, her voice echoing with power. "The protection I gave him with my sacrifice lives in his blood. You cannot overcome it." The creature shrieked in rage, lunging toward them, only to be repelled by a barrier of golden light. Where it touched the light, its form seemed to smoke and dissolve. "What is happening?" it demanded, panic replacing its earlier arrogance. "What is this magic?" "Old magic," Lily replied simply. "Love magic. Something you have never understood and therefore cannot defeat." Harry felt a tugging sensation, as though someone were trying to pull him back into his body. The void around him began to dissolve, his mother's form growing fainter. "Mum, don't go," he cried, reaching for her. Lily's indistinct face turned toward him, and he had the impression of a sad smile. "I must, my darling. But know that I am always with you, always watching over you." Her voice began to fade. "Find Padfoot, trust the wolf, beware the rat." Before Harry could ask what she meant, the void collapsed entirely. With a gasping breath, he returned to his body on the altar, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Above him, the goblin healers were still chanting, though their voices sounded ragged with exhaustion. A black, tar-like substance was being drawn from his scar, hovering in a contained sphere of magic above his head. "Separate the foreign soul fragment," Bonecrusher ordered, her voice strained. "Prepare the containment vessel." Another goblin approached with a small obsidian box covered in silver runes. With intricate wand movements, the sphere of black matter was guided into the box, which was promptly sealed with both magic and a heavy silver lock. "Cleanse the connection point," Bonecrusher continued, applying a salve that burned like acid to Harry's scar. Final purification sequence. The chanting rose to a crescendo, and Harry felt one last surge of magic wash through him, not painful this time, but cool and refreshing, like diving into a clear mountain lake. The tension drained from his body, his muscles going limp against the altar as darkness claimed him once more. Albus Dumbledore was having what he considered a rather pleasant day. The start of term was still several weeks away, giving him ample time to review curriculum changes, interview a new Muggle Studies professor, and enjoy the rare peace that descended upon Hogwarts during the summer months. He was currently in his office, savoring a particularly fine sherbet lemon while reviewing the latest correspondence from Nicholas Flamel regarding their ongoing alchemical research. The sudden flare of his Floo connection and the appearance of Minerva McGonagall's head in the green flames was, therefore, a somewhat unwelcome interruption. "Albus," she called, her Scottish brogue more pronounced than usual, a sure sign of agitation. "You need to come through immediately. There are Aurors in the entrance hall." Dumbledore's bushy eyebrows rose in mild surprise. "Aurors? Has something happened, Minerva? They're refusing to tell me anything except that they need to speak with you urgently. Something about a treaty violation." McGonagall's expression was a mixture of confusion and indignation. "Amelia Bones herself is leading them." Now that was concerning. For the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to personally lead a team of Aurors to Hogwarts during the summer holiday, the matter must be serious indeed. "I'll be right through," Dumbledore assured her, rising from his desk with a grace that belied his advanced years. He briefly considered taking a moment to alert Severus. The potions master was one of his most valuable sources of information and counsel, but decided against it. Best to assess the situation himself first. Stepping through the flue into the deputy headmistress's office, Dumbledore straightened his star-spangled robes and adjusted his half-moon spectacles. "Lead the way, Minerva." They found the Auror contingent waiting in the entrance hall, 6 of them in total, all wearing the formal crimson robes of their office. At their head stood Amelia Bones, her monocle glinting in the sunlight streaming through the high windows, her expression inscrutable. "Madam Bones," Dumbledore greeted warmly, spreading his arms in a gesture of welcome. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to Hogwarts on this fine summer day?" Amelia Bones did not return his smile. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore," she intoned formally, "I am here on behalf of the Ministry of Magic and Gringotts Bank to serve you with notice of charges under Article 7 of the Treaty of 1612. Dumbledore's genial expression didn't waver, though a flicker of concern passed through his eyes. "Article 7? My dear Amelia, there must be some misunderstanding. I have always maintained excellent relations with our goblin friends. The charges are as follows," Bones continued as though he hadn't spoken, unrolling an official-looking parchment. "Illegal interference with inheritance matters of a noble house, application of unauthorized magical bindings on a minor heir, illegal appropriation of magical guardianship, violation of a sealed will, and indirect responsibility for the false imprisonment of the rightful guardian of said heir." Each charge hit Dumbledore like a physical blow, though he maintained his composed exterior. There was only one heir this could possibly refer to, Harry Potter. But how? The boy was safely with his relatives, protected by blood wards, and completely isolated from the wizarding world. Dumbledore had personally ensured this, placing monitoring charms around Privet Drive that would alert him if any wizard or witch approached. No one should have been able to discover the truth about the boy's situation, not for several more years, at least. "I see," he said carefully. "And may I ask which heir these charges concern?" "You know very well which heir, Albus," Bones replied coldly. "Harry Potter was brought to Gringotts this morning by his Muggle aunt. An inheritance test was performed, revealing multiple violations of both wizard and goblin law, all traced back to you." McGonagall gasped beside him. "Harry Potter? Albus, what is she talking about?" Dumbledore ignored her, his mind racing through possibilities and contingency plans. This was a severe setback to his carefully orchestrated plans for the boy, but not insurmountable. He still had significant political capital to expend, and the wizarding world's faith in their beloved leader had not wavered in the years since Voldemort's defeat. "I assume the goblins are demanding my presence at Gringotts?" he asked calmly. Bones nodded. "They have invoked their right to try wizards who interfere with inheritance matters. As per the treaty, the ministry must comply with this request." Her expression softened fractionally. "Albus, this is serious. The goblins are furious. If you come willingly, it will reflect better on your case." "Of course," Dumbledore agreed magnanimously, as though they were discussing nothing more serious than a tea invitation. "I would be delighted to clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding. Minerva, please inform the staff that I will be away on ministry business for a day or two." "Albus," McGonagall hissed, grabbing his arm as he moved to follow the Aurors. "What have you done with Potter? You assured me he was safe and well cared for." For a brief moment, Dumbledore allowed his mask to slip, revealing the weary, burdened man beneath. "Everything I have done has been for the greater good, Minerva," he said softly. "Sometimes, difficult choices must be made for the benefit of all." Before she could respond, he straightened his shoulders and followed Madame Bones and her Aurors toward the castle doors, his mind already formulating the arguments he would present to the Goblin Council. He had faced worse challenges in his long life and emerged victorious. This would be no different. Or so he believed. Harry awoke slowly, consciousness returning in gradual waves. The first thing he noticed was how comfortable he felt. He was lying on something soft and warm, a far cry from his thin mattress in the cupboard under the stairs. The second thing he noticed was that he could see perfectly, despite not wearing his glasses. Blinking in confusion, he sat up and looked around. He was in a large, circular room with high ceilings and walls of polished stone. The bed he occupied was at least 3 times the size of his cupboard, with silk sheets and plush pillows. A fire crackled merrily in a hearth across the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Ah, you're awake, young heir." Harry turned toward the voice to find Healer Bonecrusher sitting in a chair near the bed, reviewing what appeared to be a medical chart. She looked exhausted but satisfied, her sharp eyes assessing him with professional interest. "How long was I asleep?" Harry asked, surprised by the clarity of his own voice. It sounded stronger, somehow. 3 days, Bonecrusher replied matter-of-factly. The ritual was more intensive than anticipated. Your magic required time to stabilize after the removal of such extensive bindings. 3 days. Harry could scarcely believe it. He had never been allowed to sleep in at the Dursleys, not even when he was sick. "Where am I? And why can I see without my glasses?" "You are in one of Gringotts' recovery chambers, deep within the bank. As for your vision..." Bonecrusher's lips twisted in what might have been a smile. "The glasses you wore were part of the bindings placed upon you. They were charmed to actually worsen your eyesight over time, creating a dependency. Your natural vision is perfect, a trait inherited from your father, according to our records." Harry's hands clenched into fists as anger coursed through him. Everything about his life had been a lie, even his poor eyesight had been deliberately inflicted upon him. By this Dumbledore person, who had apparently appointed himself Harry's magical guardian after imprisoning his rightful godfather. "What's happened while I've been asleep?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Has my godfather been found? What about Dumbledore?" Bonecrusher set aside her chart. "Sirius Black has been retrieved from Azkaban and is currently undergoing healing treatment similar to your own, though his condition is significantly worse after 4 years of exposure to Dementors, foul creatures that guard the wizard prison," she explained, seeing Harry's confusion. "As for Dumbledore, he arrived at Gringotts yesterday under Auror escort and is being held in our secure cells pending his trial." "I want to see him," Harry said suddenly, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I want to ask him why he did this to me." The goblin healer considered him thoughtfully. "That may be arranged, though Director Ragnarok will need to approve it. The trial is scheduled for tomorrow, so you would not have long to wait in any case." She rose from her chair. "But first, you should eat. Your body has undergone significant changes and requires nourishment." As if on cue, a door opened, and a younger goblin entered carrying a tray laden with food, far more than Harry could possibly eat. The aroma made his stomach growl audibly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in 3 days. While Harry ate, discovering to his amazement that he was ravenously hungry and able to consume far more than he ever had at the Dursleys, Bonecrusher explained the physical changes resulting from the ritual. "The growth inhibitor placed on you was particularly vicious," she said, her voice reflecting goblin disdain for such magic. "It was designed to keep you small and weak, limiting both your physical and magical development. Now that it's removed, you've already experienced a growth spurt of approximately 3 inches, putting you at a normal height for a child your age." Harry had noticed that his pajamas, which someone had dressed him in while he was unconscious, fit perfectly, unlike the oversized hand-me-downs he was accustomed to. "Your magical core is still stabilizing," Bonecrusher continued, "but preliminary measurements suggest you will be exceptionally powerful once fully matured. The intelligence inhibitor's removal has also enhanced your cognitive functions. You may notice improvements in memory, comprehension, and problem-solving abilities." Harry nodded, realizing that he was following her technical explanation without difficulty, despite having received minimal education at his Muggle primary school. What was it called? The Horcrux? Bonecrusher's expression darkened. That abomination has been contained and transferred to our curse-breaking department for study and eventual destruction. It was a soul fragment belonging to the Dark Lord who killed your parents, an extremely dark piece of magic that should never have been allowed to remain attached to you. Had it not been removed, it would have continued to influence your thoughts and emotions as you grew older. A shudder ran through Harry at the thought of carrying a piece of his parents' murderer inside him for all those years. "Thank you for removing it," he said sincerely. Bonecrusher inclined her head in acknowledgement. "It is rare for a wizard to thank a goblin for anything," she observed. "Perhaps you are not entirely like the rest of your kind." Before Harry could respond, the chamber door opened again, and Director Ragnarok entered, followed by Silveraxe and another goblin Harry hadn't met before. "Herr Potter," Ragnarok greeted formally. "It is good to see you recovered. How do you feel?" "Better than I ever have, sir," Harry replied honestly. "Everything seems clearer somehow, like I've been looking at the world through a foggy window all my life, and someone just wiped it clean." Ragnarok nodded approvingly. "An apt description of the effects of removing magical bindings. Your natural abilities are finally able to express themselves." He gestured to the unfamiliar goblin. "This is Ironclaw, head of our legal department. He will be representing you in tomorrow's proceedings against Albus Dumbledore." Ironclaw stepped forward, giving Harry a formal bow. "Herr Potter, it is an honor to represent your interests. The case against Dumbledore is formidable, with the inheritance test providing irrefutable evidence of his crimes. Healer Bonecrusher mentioned I might be able to speak with him before the trial," Harry said, looking between the goblins. "I'd like to do that, if possible." The three senior goblins exchanged glances, communicating silently in that way of colleagues who have worked together for many years. "It is unusual," Ironclaw said slowly. "But as the primary victim of his crimes, you have certain rights under goblin law. If you feel strong enough, a supervised meeting could be arranged this evening." "I'm strong enough," Harry insisted, swinging his legs over the side of the bed to demonstrate. He was surprised to find that he felt perfectly steady, better than steady, in fact. His body felt lighter, more energetic than he could ever remember. "Very well," Ragnarok decided. "But there are other matters to discuss first." He turned to Silveraxe. "Has Mrs. Dursley been informed of Herr Potter's recovery?" "Yes, Director," Silveraxe replied. "She and her son remain at the Leaky Cauldron, though she has expressed increasing impatience regarding their extended stay in the wizarding world." "Understandable, for a Muggle," Ragnarok commented. "Arrange for them to return home tomorrow after the trial. There will be no further need for their testimony once Dumbledore's verdict is delivered." He turned back to Harry. "Unless, of course, you wish to return with them?" "No!" Harry exclaimed, perhaps more forcefully than intended. Then, more calmly, "No, sir. I'd rather not go back there." As expected, Ragnarok nodded. "Which brings us to the matter of your future guardianship. Assuming Sirius Black is cleared of all charges, which seems likely given the preliminary questioning under Veritaserum, he will be your legal guardian as specified in your parents' will. However, his recovery will take time, possibly months. In the interim, temporary guardianship must be established." "Couldn't I just stay here?" Harry asked hopefully. Despite the initial pain of the ritual, his brief time at Gringotts had been the best experience of his life. The goblins treated him with respect, explained things clearly, and genuinely seemed to care about his welfare, more than the Dursleys ever had. Ragnarok's eyebrows rose in surprise. "At Gringotts? That is unprecedented. Wizards do not typically reside within goblin territories." "But not impossible?" Harry pressed, sensing an opening. The three goblins conferred briefly in their own language before Ragnarok addressed him again. "Not impossible, no. As an heir to multiple noble houses who has been grievously wronged under our jurisdiction, you could claim temporary sanctuary within Gringotts. This would place you under the direct protection of the Goblin Nation until your rightful guardian is able to assume his responsibilities. That's what I want, then, Harry said firmly. If that's all right. Ragnarok studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Very well, Herr Potter. Gringotts will grant you sanctuary and serve as your temporary guardian until Lord Black is able to claim you. A hint of something almost like amusement crossed his stern features. The wizarding world will find this most unusual. Speaking of the wizarding world, Ironclaw interjected, there is the matter of tomorrow's trial and its potential political implications. Dumbledore has many supporters who will not take kindly to his arrest, regardless of the evidence against him. Let them object, Ragnarok said dismissively. The Treaty of 1612 is clear. Interference with noble house inheritances falls under Goblin jurisdiction. The Ministry has already acknowledged this by delivering Dumbledore to us. Nevertheless, Silverax cautioned, we should be prepared for backlash. The trial should be conducted with representatives from the Ministry present as observers, to ensure transparency. Agreed, Ragnarok nodded. Ironclaw, ensure that Madame Bones and a delegation from the Wisengamot are invited to observe the proceedings. He turned back to Harry. Now, regarding your meeting with Dumbledore, are you certain this is what you wish? Harry nodded resolutely. I need to understand why he did this to me. Why he left me with people who hated me, when I should have been with my godfather. Very well. Once you've finished eating and Healer Bonecrusher has conducted a final examination to ensure you're fully recovered, we will arrange a supervised visitation to the holding cells. Ragnarok's expression grew severe. But be warned, Herr Potter, Albus Dumbledore is a master manipulator. Do not trust anything he says, no matter how reasonable it may seem. After the goblins departed and Harry had completed his meal, Healer Bonecrusher conducted a thorough examination, using both magical instruments and her own keen senses to assess his condition. Remarkable, she muttered, reviewing the results. Your magic has not only stabilized but strengthened considerably in just 3 days. And the physical changes. She measured his height again, marking it against a chart. Another half-inch since this morning. Your body is making up for years of stunted growth. Will I always grow this quickly? Harry asked, somewhat alarmed at the prospect. No, this is merely the initial compensation phase. Your growth rate should normalize within a week or two, though you may experience periodic growth spurts for the next few years as your body continues to correct the damage done by the inhibitor charm. She made a final notation on her chart. You are cleared for light activity, including your meeting with Dumbledore. However, I recommend against any strenuous magical exertion for at least another week. Shortly thereafter, Gornak arrived to escort Harry to the holding cells. He provided Harry with proper wizarding attire, simple but well-made robes in a deep green that complemented his house colors, whatever that meant. Harry was just grateful to be wearing clothes that actually fit. The journey to the holding cells took them even deeper beneath Gringotts, down winding staircases and through corridors carved directly from the bedrock beneath London. The air grew cooler and danker, the lighting dimmer, provided only by occasional enchanted torches that cast eerie shadows on the rough stone walls. The high-security holding cells are among our oldest constructions, Gornak explained as they descended a particularly steep staircase. They were originally designed to contain magical creatures that attempted to breach our vaults, dragons, chimeras, and the like. Over the centuries, they were adapted to hold the occasional wizard foolish enough to attempt theft from Gringotts. Has anyone ever escaped? Harry asked curiously. Gornak's sharp-toothed smile held no humor. No, Herr Potter. No one escapes goblin justice. They finally reached a heavy iron door guarded by 2 armored goblins carrying what appeared to be a cross between a spear and a battle-axe. Upon seeing Gornak and Harry, they stood at attention. Herr Potter to see the prisoner Dumbledore, by authorization of Director Ragnarok, Gornak announced formally. The guards nodded in unison and stepped aside, one of them placing a clawed hand against the door. Harry heard a series of clicks as multiple locks disengaged, and the massive door swung open silently. Beyond lay a short corridor with 3 cells on each side, their barred fronts glowing with a faint blue light that Harry assumed was magical in nature. 5 of the cells appeared empty. In the 6th, a tall figure sat on a simple cot, his long silver beard tucked into his belt, his half-moon spectacles glinting in the dim light. Despite his imprisonment, Albus Dumbledore somehow maintained an aura of dignified serenity, his hands folded calmly in his lap as he gazed at his visitors with mild interest. "Young Harry," he said softly, his blue eyes twinkling as though they were meeting for tea rather than in a prison cell. "How wonderful to see you at last. I had hoped our first meeting would be under more auspicious circumstances, but alas, fate often has other plans." Harry approached the cell cautiously, stopping just beyond arm's reach of the glowing bars. Gornick positioned himself slightly behind Harry, one hand resting on the hilt of a small dagger at his belt. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Harry acknowledged, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I have some questions for you." "Naturally, my boy, naturally. Curiosity is the foundation of wisdom." Dumbledore's voice was warm and grandfatherly, his smile benign. "I imagine you must be quite confused by recent events." "Not confused," Harry corrected, feeling a flicker of annoyance at the man's condescending tone. "Angry. I want to know why you left me with the Dursleys when my parents will specifically said I shouldn't go there. Why you bound my magic and my intelligence. Why you put blocks on me that stunted my growth and damaged my eyesight. Why you let my godfather rot in prison without a trial." Each accusation landed like a physical blow, though Dumbledore's serene expression never wavered. When Harry finished, the old wizard sighed deeply, the sound heavy with what seemed like genuine regret. "Harry, my boy, I can only imagine how these actions must appear to you. Without context, they seem cruel, perhaps even malicious." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intensely blue behind his spectacles. "But you must understand, everything I did to protect you." "Protect me?" Harry echoed incredulously. "From what?" "The Dursleys hated me. They made me sleep in a cupboard. They barely fed me." A flash of something, surprise, perhaps, or distress, crossed Dumbledore's face before his calm mask returned. "I was not aware of the extent of their neglect. My monitoring charms showed only that you were alive and in reasonable health. For that oversight, I am truly sorry." "If you were really sorry, you wouldn't have put me there in the first place," Harry retorted. "Why not place me with Sirius Black, like my parents wanted?" "Ah, Sirius." Dumbledore shook his head sadly. "A tragic misunderstanding. You see, Harry, in the chaos following your parents' deaths, evidence emerged suggesting that Sirius had betrayed them to Voldemort. I believed, as did many others, that he was guilty. It was only when the goblins performed their own questioning under Veritaserum that the truth came to light." "And you didn't think he deserved a trial?" Harry demanded. "For years in prison for something he didn't do." "A grievous miscarriage of justice," Dumbledore agreed solemnly. "One of many terrible errors made in the aftermath of the war. But you must understand, Harry, those were dark, chaotic times. Voldemort's followers were still at large, hunting for you. I needed to place you somewhere safe, somewhere protected by the strongest magic I knew." "The Blood Wards," Harry said, remembering the term from the inheritance test. Dumbledore nodded, looking faintly impressed. "Exactly so. Your mother's sacrifice created a powerful protection within your blood, protection that could be extended through her blood relatives. By placing you with Petunia, I ensured that no Death Eater, no follower of Voldemort, could find or harm you there. But the goblins found me," Harry pointed out. "Aunt Petunia brought me right into the wizarding world without any trouble." "Because she chose to bring you," Dumbledore explained patiently. "The wards prevent forced entry with malicious intent. They do not prevent your aunt from bringing you places of her own free will." Despite his anger, Harry found himself begrudgingly following the old wizard's logic. If powerful dark wizards had truly been hunting for him, perhaps some form of protection had been necessary. But that didn't explain everything. What about the bindings on my magic? He challenged. How was making me weak and stupid supposed to protect me? For the first time, Dumbledore looked genuinely uncomfortable. That is more complicated, Harry. There were prophecies to consider, magical resonances between you and Voldemort that I did not fully understand. I feared that your connection to him, the one that gave you that scar, might allow him to influence you as you grew older and your magic developed. You mean the Horcrux, Harry said flatly. Dumbledore's eyes widened in genuine shock. You know about. The Goblins told you? They didn't just tell me, they removed it, Harry informed him with grim satisfaction. Along with all the other bindings and blocks you put on me. It's gone, Professor. The piece of Voldemort that was in my scar. The elderly wizard seemed momentarily speechless, genuine emotion breaking through his composed facade. They removed it? How? I've researched Horcruxes extensively, and the only known methods of destruction are fiendfire or basilisk venom, both of which would surely kill the host. Goblin magic, Harry replied with a shrug. They used blood magic to draw it out and contain it. Blood magic, Dumbledore murmured, looking troubled. Of course, the goblins never abandoned those ancient arts as wizards did. Remarkable. He gazed at Harry with new intensity. How do you feel, Harry? Different? Lighter, perhaps? I feel like myself, Harry said firmly. Only stronger. Clearer. Like I'm finally who I was always supposed to be. Something that might have been relief passed across Dumbledore's features. That is, excellent news, my boy. Truly excellent. He seemed lost in thought for a moment before refocusing on Harry. If the Horcrux has indeed been removed without harming you, that changes everything. Many of my plans were contingent on finding a way to safely separate you from that fragment of Tom's soul. Tom? Tom Riddle, the birth name of the wizard who later called himself Lord Voldemort, Dumbledore explained. He was once a student at Hogwarts, much like you will be in a few years' time. Harry filed this information away for future consideration. You still haven't explained why you blocked my intelligence. Or why you made me dependent on glasses I didn't actually need. Dumbledore sighed heavily. Those decisions, in hindsight, may have been excessive. I feared that if you developed too quickly, showed too much magical aptitude or intelligence while living among Muggles, it might draw unwanted attention to you. The Dursleys, as you've noted, were not fond of magic. I thought perhaps if your accidental magic was suppressed, if you seemed more ordinary, they might treat you better. He grimaced slightly. Clearly, I was mistaken in that assumption. And my godfather? Harry pressed, unwilling to let any of his questions go unanswered. Why didn't you ensure he received a trial? You're the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, aren't you? You could have insisted. I could have, Dumbledore admitted, his voice heavy with what seemed like genuine regret. I should have. But I was convinced of his guilt, Harry. The evidence against him was compelling. He was found at the scene, laughing maniacally amid the bodies of 12 Muggles and a wizard named Peter Pettigrew. All that remained of Pettigrew was a finger. The Goblins said Sirius was questioned under Veritaserum, Harry said. He must have told the truth about what really happened. Indeed. And I look forward to hearing that truth myself at tomorrow's proceedings. Dumbledore adjusted his position on the hard cot, wincing slightly as though his old bones protested the uncomfortable accommodation. Harry, I won't ask for your forgiveness, not yet. My actions, however well-intentioned, caused you great suffering. But I do ask that you consider the context in which those decisions were made. The wizarding world had just emerged from a terrible war. You are, incredibly important, not just as the boy who lived, but for reasons tied to prophecies that even now, I hesitate to burden you with. Harry studied the old wizard carefully, trying to reconcile the grandfatherly figure before him with the mastermind who had orchestrated 4 years of misery. The Goblins said you're a master manipulator, he said finally. That I shouldn't trust anything you say. A sad smile crossed Dumbledore's face. The Goblins have their perspective, as do I. Truth, my boy, often lies somewhere in between competing narratives. He leaned forward, his blue eyes suddenly intense. But ask yourself this, Harry, if my goal had truly been to harm you, to weaken you permanently, why would I have arranged for you to attend Hogwarts in a few years' time? Why establish a trust vault for your education? Why leave your family's invisibility cloak in my safe keeping, to be returned to you when you came of age? Harry hesitated, uncertainty creeping in for the first time since the conversation began. I don't know, he admitted reluctantly. Because, Harry, despite my many mistakes, my ultimate goal has always been your welfare and the defeat of the dark forces that threaten our world. Dumbledore sighed deeply. I am an old man who has lived too long and seen too much. I have made terrible errors in judgment, believing that I alone knew what was best. Perhaps that is my greatest flaw, the assumption that my greater experience and knowledge qualified me to make decisions that should have been left to others. Despite himself, Harry felt a twinge of sympathy for the elderly wizard. There was something disarming about Dumbledore's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes, even as he justified the reasoning behind them. Tomorrow's trial, Harry said after a moment of silence. What will happen to you? Ah, Goblin justice. Dumbledore's smile turned wry. It tends to be rather more direct than wizard jurisprudence. I expect significant financial penalties, at minimum. The Potter estate will likely be owed substantial reparations. Beyond that, he shrugged philosophically. I may lose my positions at the Wizengamot and the International Confederation. Possibly even my headmastership, though I hope not. I am rather fond of Hogwarts. You don't seem very worried, Harry observed. My dear boy, at my age, one learns to accept the consequences of one's actions with equanimity. I have lived a long and mostly satisfying life. If my remaining years must be spent in somewhat reduced circumstances as penance for my mistakes regarding you, so be it. He adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully. Though I do hope to retain some role in the coming conflict. Voldemort is not truly gone, Harry, as the presence of his Horcrux in your scar confirmed. He will return, and when he does, the wizarding world will need every ally it can muster. Harry wasn't sure how to respond to that ominous prediction. Before he could formulate a reply, Gornik cleared his throat behind him. Herr Potter, we should return. Director Ragnarok will be waiting for your report, and you still require rest before tomorrow's proceedings. Harry nodded, taking a step back from the cell. Thank you for answering my questions, he said to Dumbledore, surprised to find he meant it despite his lingering anger. Thank you for asking them, Harry, Dumbledore replied gently. It is rare for an old man to be granted the opportunity to explain himself to those he has wronged. Whatever tomorrow brings, I am grateful for this conversation. As Harry turned to leave, Dumbledore called after him, Harry? One last thing, when you see Sirius, please tell him I am profoundly sorry for doubting him. And that I hope, in time, he might find it in his heart to forgive an old man's grievous error. Harry made no promises but acknowledged the message with a slight nod before following Gornik back through the iron door. As it clanged shut behind them, he found himself conflicted, still angry at the manipulations that had shaped his early life, yet unable to fully dismiss Dumbledore's explanations. He is very convincing, is he not? Gornik observed as they began their ascent back to the upper levels of the bank. Yes, Harry admitted. I can see why people follow him. Remember this, Herr Potter, the goblin advised gravely, the most dangerous manipulators are those who truly believe their manipulations are justified. Dumbledore is not evil, he genuinely believes he acts for the greater good. That makes him more persuasive, and ultimately more dangerous, than a villain who acts from simple malice. Harry pondered this insight as they made their way back to his chamber. Despite his exhaustion, his mind was buzzing with everything he had learned. Tomorrow would bring Dumbledore's trial and, hopefully, a chance to meet his godfather. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter was looking forward to the future with something approaching hope. While Harry was confronting Dumbledore beneath Gringotts, a very different conversation was taking place several floors above in one of the bank's healing chambers. Sirius Black lay on a bed similar to Harry's, though his gaunt frame and hollow-cheeked face bore witness to the horrors of Azkaban. For years surrounded by Dementors had taken their toll, his once handsome features were ravaged, his dark hair streaked with premature gray, his eyes haunted by memories no one should have to endure. Yet there was life in those eyes now, a spark of the old Sirius returning as the goblin healers worked to restore his health and counteract the effects of long-term Dementor exposure. And seated beside his bed, holding his skeletal hand in a firm grip, was a man whose careworn face and shabby robes spoke of different but no less significant hardships. "I should have known," Remus Lupin was saying, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have demanded to see evidence, pushed for a trial, something." "Not your fault, Moony," Sirius rasped, his voice still recovering from years of disuse. "We all believed what we wanted to believe. I thought you might be the spy, remember? We were all paranoid back then." Remus shook his head, unable to forgive himself so easily. "But 4 years, Padfoot. 4 years while I wandered Europe feeling sorry for myself, never once questioning why my friend, my brother in all but blood, would betray James and Lily." "Water under the bridge," Sirius insisted weakly. "What matters now is Harry. The goblins say he's here, that he's safe. That's all I care about." "He's more than safe," Remus assured him, squeezing Sirius's hand gently. According to Director Ragnarok, the ritual to remove the magical bindings was successful. They even managed to extract some kind of dark magic from his scar, something Dumbledore apparently knew about but left untreated. Sirius's emaciated face twisted with anger. "That manipulative old goat. When I get my hands on him, the goblins have him in custody," Remus interrupted soothingly. "He'll face trial tomorrow. Justice will be served, Padfoot." "But why, Moony? Why did he do it? Why leave Harry with those horrible muggles when the will explicitly stated he should never go there?" Remus sighed, running a hand through his prematurely graying hair. "I've been asking myself the same question. The only explanation I can think of is the blood protection. Lily's sacrifice created a powerful ward against Voldemort, one that could be sustained through her blood relatives. So he sacrificed Harry's happiness and well-being for protection against a supposedly dead Dark Lord?" Sirius growled, attempting to sit up before a wave of dizziness forced him back against the pillows. "Damn it, Moony, what kind of protection is that? What's the point of saving the boy from Death Eaters if he grows up miserable and abused?" "I know, Padfoot, I know." Remus stood and began pacing the small chamber, his natural restlessness intensified by the approaching full moon. "But Dumbledore always plays the long game. He must have had reasons beyond the blood protection, reasons he hasn't shared with anyone." "Well, he can explain those reasons to the Goblin Tribunal," Sirius muttered darkly. "Not that it will help him much. The goblins take inheritance interference very seriously." A ghost of his old mischievous grin flickered across his gaunt face. "Almost wish I could see the old man's face when they pronounce sentence. Bet he never thought he'd end up in goblin custody." Remus allowed himself a small smile in return, encouraged by this glimpse of the old Sirius. "The question is, what happens next? Assuming you're cleared of all charges, which seems likely given the Veritaserum testimony, you'll be Harry's legal guardian. But the healers say your recovery will take months." "I don't care if it takes years," Sirius declared fiercely. "I'll do whatever it takes to get well enough to care for Harry properly. I owe it to James and Lily. And in the meantime?" "The goblins mentioned something about temporary sanctuary, but that can't be a permanent solution. Sirius was silent for a moment, considering. "What about you, Moony?" "You could." "No," Remus interrupted firmly. "The Ministry would never allow a werewolf to have even temporary custody of the boy who lived. You know the laws as well as I do." "Laws can be changed," Sirius argued. "I'm still Lord Black, despite everything. The Black family still carries political weight." "Perhaps eventually," Remus conceded. "But for now, we need to focus on your recovery and ensuring Harry is safe and properly cared for." He paused, seeming to wrestle with a decision. "There is one possibility I've been considering. It's unorthodox, but it might work." Sirius raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite his exhaustion. "Go on. What if we created a magical household?" Remus suggested, warming to his topic. "A property warded and staffed specifically for Harry's protection and education. You would be his legal guardian, but until you're fully recovered, he would be cared for by trusted individuals, myself included, whenever the moon permits." "You mean like a safe house?" "More like a proper home, but with additional security measures," Remus clarified. "We could use one of the Potter properties, Lily's Haven, perhaps. It's unplottable, already heavily warded, and located in a beautiful area of Scotland where Harry could have space to grow and play safely." Sirius nodded slowly, considering the idea. "Who would staff it?" "We'd need people we trust implicitly." "I've been making a list," Remus admitted. "Minerva McGonagall for one. She was furious when she found out what Dumbledore had done. She'd be an excellent tutor in transfiguration and magical theory. Phileas Flitwick might be persuaded to help during holidays. And for a permanent caretaker." He hesitated before continuing. "I was thinking about Andromeda Tonks, actually. She's your cousin, a healer by training, and she and Ted raised a daughter who just started at Hogwarts. They know what they're doing." "Andy," Sirius murmured, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time. "Yes, she'd be perfect. She always had a soft spot for me, even after I was blasted off the family tapestry. And Ted's a good man, a Muggleborn who could help Harry understand both worlds. Plus, they have no ties to Dumbledore," Remus added. "They were never part of the Order of the Phoenix, so their loyalties aren't divided." Sirius's expression grew more animated as he warmed to the plan. "We could bring in tutors for different subjects, give Harry a head start before Hogwarts. Not just academics, but wizarding culture, politics, the responsibilities of being a noble heir." His voice trailed off as exhaustion overtook his enthusiasm. "But will Harry want this? He doesn't know me, Moony." "What if he will," Remus assured him gently. "Once he meets you, once he understands who you are to him, he'll want to be with you. James and Lily's son could never fail to recognize someone who truly loves him." Tears gathered in Sirius's sunken eyes. "I've missed so much, Moony." His first words, his first steps, 4 years of his life, gone. "But not the rest," Remus reminded him firmly. "He's only 5, Padfoot. You have years ahead to be the godfather James and Lily wanted you to be. Years to create new memories." A knock at the chamber door interrupted their conversation. A moment later, Healer Bonecrusher entered, carrying a tray of potions. "Lord Black, it's time for your next round of treatments," she announced briskly. "Mr. Lupin, I must ask you to leave. The patient requires rest before tomorrow's proceedings." Remus nodded, rising from his chair. "Of course. I'll return in the morning, Padfoot." "Bring Harry," Sirius requested, his voice fading as the potions took effect. "Promise me, Moony. Bring him to see me." "I promise," Remus assured him, squeezing his friend's hand one last time before departing. The following morning dawned bright and clear over London, though deep within Gringotts, the passage of day and night was marked only by the changing of goblin guards and the scheduled delivery of meals. Harry awoke early, his mind immediately racing with thoughts of the upcoming trial and, more importantly, the prospect of meeting his godfather. After a hearty breakfast and a final checkup from healer Bonecrusher, who pronounced him fit to attend the day's proceedings, Harry was provided with formal wizarding attire befitting his status as heir to multiple noble houses. The robes were a deep, midnight blue with subtle silver threading around the cuffs and collar, complemented by a cloak fastened with a silver pin bearing the Potter family crest, a shield depicting a griffin rampant. "You must dress the part of Heir Potter today," Silverax explained as a goblin attendant helped Harry with the unfamiliar clothing. The wizarding world places great importance on appearances, particularly in formal settings. Harry fidgeted with the high collar of his robes, unused to such formal attire. "Will there be many people at the trial?" "A limited audience," Silverax assured him. "Representatives from the Ministry of Magic, members of the Wizengamot, and key witnesses. The proceedings will not be open to the general public, though I expect news will spread quickly once a verdict is reached." A knock at the chamber door announced the arrival of Ironclaw, dressed in what Harry assumed was formal goblin attire, armor polished to a mirror shine beneath a crimson tabard embroidered with the Gringotts crest. "Heir Potter," he greeted with a formal bow. "It is time. The tribunal awaits." Harry followed Ironclaw and Silverax through a labyrinth of corridors he hadn't seen before, eventually arriving at a set of massive bronze doors engraved with scenes of what appeared to be historical events, battles, treaties, and ceremonies involving both goblins and wizards. 2 honor guards stood at attention, their armor even more elaborate than that of the regular Gringotts guards. "The Hall of Treaties," Ironclaw informed Harry as they approached. "Where all major agreements between the Goblin Nation and the wizarding world have been negotiated and signed for the past 7 centuries. Today, it serves as our court of justice." The guard saluted as the doors swung open, revealing a vast, circular chamber with tiered seating surrounding a central floor. The ceiling arched high overhead, supported by massive columns of black marble veined with gold. Hundreds of enchanted crystals provided illumination, casting the chamber in a warm, golden glow. Already seated in the tiered rows were dozens of goblins on one side of the chamber and a smaller contingent of witches and wizards on the other. Harry recognized Amelia Bones from healer Bonecrusher's description, a square-jawed witch with a monocle who sat at the head of the wizard delegation. Beside her were several elderly witches and wizards wearing plum-colored robes that Harry guessed must be the Wizengamot representatives. In the center of the floor stood a raised dais with a single chair, currently empty, and before it, a long table where Director Ragnarok was already seated alongside 2 senior goblins Harry hadn't met before. Opposite them was another table where Albus Dumbledore sat alone, no longer in his colorful robes but dressed in simple gray attire that nonetheless managed to look dignified on his tall frame. As Harry entered, a hush fell over the assembly, all eyes turning to observe the small boy who had triggered this unprecedented proceeding. Harry fought the urge to shrink away from the scrutiny, instead straightening his shoulders as Silverax had instructed him. "Head high, Heir Potter," Ironclaw murmured beside him. "You have done nothing wrong. It is they who should feel shame for allowing these injustices to occur." Ironclaw led Harry to a smaller table position to one side of the central dais. Already seated there was a man Harry hadn't seen before, thin and shabby-looking with prematurely graying hair and a kind face marked by several scars. When he saw Harry, the man rose to his feet, an expression of mingled joy and sorrow crossing his features. "Harry," he whispered, seeming unable to speak louder. "You look so much like James, but you have Lily's eyes." Before Harry could respond, Ironclaw stepped forward. "Heir Potter, this is Remus Lupin. He was a close friend of your parents and has been asked to serve as a character witness today." "You knew my parents?" Harry asked eagerly, immediately warming to the man despite his ragged appearance. Remus nodded, swallowing hard. "Your father was one of my best friends from our first day at Hogwarts. And your mother was the kindest, most brilliant witch I've ever known." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Please, sit. The proceedings are about to begin." As Harry took his seat, a gong sounded 3 times, its deep resonance filling the chamber and immediately silencing all conversation. Director Ragnarok rose to his feet, his voice magically amplified to reach every corner of the vast hall. By the authority vested in me as director of Gringotts Bank and representative of the Goblin Nation, I hereby convene this tribunal under Article 7 of the Treaty of 1612, he declared formally. We gather to address grievous violations of inheritance law, magical guardianship statutes, and the sanctity of noble house succession. Ragnarok gestured to Dumbledore. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore stands accused of multiple violations against heir Harry James Potter of the most ancient and noble house of Potter. These violations include illegal interference with a sealed will, unauthorized assumption of magical guardianship, placement of harmful magical bindings upon a minor heir, illegal placement with unauthorized guardians contrary to expressed wishes in a legal will, and indirect responsibility for the false imprisonment of the rightful guardian, Lord Sirius Black of the most ancient and noble house of Black. Murmurs swept through the wizard section of the audience, though the goblins remained stoically silent. As is customary in cases involving noble heirs, Ragnarok continued, the aggrieved party will be invited to give testimony first. He turned to Harry. Heir Potter, please approach the witness dais. Harry rose on slightly trembling legs, grateful for Remus's encouraging nod as he made his way to the raised platform in the center of the chamber. The chair, he discovered as he climbed the steps, was sized for an adult, leaving his feet dangling several inches above the floor when he sat. Heir Potter, Ragnarok addressed him formally, for the record of this tribunal, please state your full name and current age. Harry James Potter, Harry replied, his voice sounding small in the vast chamber despite the magical amplification. I'm 5 years old. Thank you. Now, in your own words, please describe your living conditions with your Muggle relatives, the Dursleys, prior to your arrival at Gringotts 3 days ago. Harry took a deep breath, acutely aware of the many eyes fixed upon him. I lived with my Aunt Petunia, Uncle Vernon, and Cousin Dudley at number 4, Privet Drive in Little Whinging. I slept in a cupboard under the stairs. My cousin had 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping and one for his broken toys. More murmurs from the wizard section, these sounding distinctly angry. Harry continued, describing in simple but clear terms the neglect and occasional abuse he had suffered, the insufficient food, the hand-me-down clothes, the chores beyond what was appropriate for a child his age, and the punishments for accidental magic. As he spoke, he noticed Dumbledore's expression growing increasingly troubled, genuine dismay evident in the old wizard's features. The witches and wizards in the audience appeared horrified, several of the elderly Wizengamot members shaking their heads in disbelief. When Harry finished his account, Ragnarok asked, "And how did you come to be at Gringotts, Heir Potter?" Harry explained about the accidental magic that had shattered the glass in the Dursley kitchen, the discovery of his mother's letter hidden in his blanket, and his aunt's reluctant agreement to bring him to London in hopes of being rid of him permanently. "Thank you for your testimony, Heir Potter," Ragnarok said when he had finished. "You may return to your seat. The tribunal now calls Albus Dumbledore to the witness dais." As Harry descended from the platform, passing Dumbledore on his way up, the old wizard gave him a sad, gentle smile that contained no trace of resentment. Harry returned to his seat beside Remus, who squeezed his shoulder supportively. "You did very well," Remus whispered. "James and Lily would be so proud of your courage." Once Dumbledore was seated on the dais, one of the goblins at Ragnarok's table rose, holding what appeared to be a small vial of clear liquid. "As per tribunal protocol, the accused will provide testimony under Veritaserum," Ragnarok announced. "Albus Dumbledore, do you consent to this truth serum?" "I do," Dumbledore replied calmly. "I have nothing to hide from this tribunal." The goblin approached, administering 3 drops of the potion onto Dumbledore's tongue. Almost immediately, a subtle change came over the old wizard, his features relaxed, his eyes lost their twinkle, and his posture became slightly slumped. "State your name and positions," Ragnarok commanded. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore," came the flat reply. headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, and chief warlock of the Wizengamot. Did you seal the last will and testament of James and Lily Potter after their deaths? Yes. By what authority did you take this action? As chief warlock, I had the legal authority to temporarily seal wills during the national emergency of Voldemort's reign of terror, Dumbledore replied in the same monotone. I chose to maintain that seal after his defeat for Harry Potter's protection. Did you read the contents of the will before sealing it? Yes. Were you aware that the will explicitly stated that Harry Potter should never be placed with Petunia and Vernon Dursley? Yes. A shocked murmur ran through the wizard section of the audience. Why did you place him there despite this explicit instruction? The blood protection created by Lily Potter's sacrifice was the strongest shield I could provide for Harry, Dumbledore explained, his voice still devoid of emotion under the potion's influence. It could only be maintained through her blood relatives, specifically, her sister Petunia. No other location, no matter how well warded, could offer the same level of protection against Voldemort and his followers. Was Voldemort not defeated that night? His body was destroyed, but I had reason to believe he was not truly dead. The prophecy concerning him and Harry suggested their confrontation was not yet complete. Ragnarok's eyes narrowed. What prophecy? Dumbledore recited in the same flat tone, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and neither must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The chamber fell utterly silent as the implications of these words sank in. Harry felt a chill run down his spine, suddenly understanding why Dumbledore had been so concerned with his protection. Did you appoint yourself as Harry Potter's magical guardian? Yes. By what authority? As chief warlock, I had emergency powers to establish guardianship for orphaned magical children during the war. I continued this guardianship afterward, believing it to be in Harry's best interests given the prophecy and the continued threat from Death Eaters. Ragnarok leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on Dumbledore. Did you place magical bindings on Harry Potter? Yes. Describe these bindings and your reasons for each. Dumbledore began listing them in the same emotionless voice, a core block to reduce accidental magic that might have endangered him among muggles or drawn attention from dark wizards. An intelligence inhibitor to help him blend in with muggle children and prevent questions about his advanced abilities. A health growth inhibitor to maintain the appearance of an ordinary, slightly undersized child, making him less recognizable as the heir to a noble house. Charms on his glasses to gradually worsen his vision, creating a dependency that would make him more cautious and less likely to wander beyond the blood wards. Loyalty compulsions keyed to myself and the Weasley family, whom I believed would provide healthy relationships for him upon his return to the wizarding world. Each admission drew increasingly angry reactions from the wizard delegation, with several Wizengamot members now openly glaring at Dumbledore. Amelia Bones's monocle had fallen from her eye in shock, and her face was flushed with fury. Were you aware of the Horcrux fragment in Harry Potter's scar? Yes. This single word caused the greatest uproar yet, with several wizards leaping to their feet in outrage. Ragnarok rapped a gavel sharply, restoring order before continuing. Why did you not take steps to remove this dark magic? I believed it could not be removed without killing Harry, Dumbledore replied. My research into Horcruxes suggested that the host must be destroyed to eliminate the soul fragment. I was searching for alternatives but had not discovered any viable methods before the Goblins performed their ritual. Were you aware that Sirius Black was innocent of the crimes for which he was imprisoned? For the first time, Dumbledore hesitated, the Veritaserum compelling him to carefully consider his answer before speaking. I had doubts about his guilt, particularly after my initial shock faded. But I did not pursue those doubts as vigorously as I should have. His imprisonment, while tragic if he was indeed innocent, served my plans for Harry's placement with the Dursleys. The silence that followed this admission was deafening. Even the goblins, who had maintained their stoic demeanor throughout, appeared shocked by this casual acknowledgement of allowing an innocent man to remain imprisoned because it was convenient. "Let the record show," Ragnarok said into the silence, "that Lord Black has been interrogated under Veritaserum and found innocent of all charges. He was never the Potter's secret keeper, never killed Peter Pettigrew or any muggles, and never served the wizard known as Voldemort in any capacity." Ragnarok nodded to the goblin who had administered the Veritaserum. "Administer the antidote. We have heard enough." As the counteragent was given to Dumbledore, color returned to his face, and awareness to his eyes. He blinked several times, then straightened in his chair, seemingly unsurprised by the hostile stares directed at him from around the chamber. "The tribunal will now hear from character witnesses," Ragnarok announced. "Remus John Lupin, please approach the dais." As Remus stood to take his place on the witness stand, Dumbledore was escorted back to his table. He passed close to Harry, pausing briefly to meet the boy's gaze. "I am truly sorry, Harry," he said softly. "For everything." Before Harry could respond, the guards led Dumbledore away. Harry turned his attention to Remus, who had taken his place on the witness dais. Remus spoke eloquently about James and Lily Potter, their love for their son, and their absolute trust in Sirius Black as Harry's godfather. He described their explicit wishes regarding Harry's care should anything happen to them, and the shock and betrayal he felt upon learning that those wishes had been deliberately ignored. "James and Lily Potter were two of the finest people I have ever known," Remus concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "They died to protect their son, making the ultimate sacrifice out of love. For their final wishes to be disregarded, for Harry to be placed in a home where he was neither loved nor wanted, for Sirius to be left to rot in Azkaban without trial, these are not merely legal violations but profound moral failures that dishonor their memory and sacrifice." When Remus returned to his seat, several more witnesses were called. Minerva McGonagall, who testified to her initial objections about placing Harry with the Dursleys, a healer from St. Mungo's who reviewed the medical evidence of Harry's neglect and the magical bindings placed upon him, and finally, a representative from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement who confirmed that no trial record existed for Sirius Black. Throughout it all, Harry sat quietly beside Remus, occasionally asking whispered questions about procedures or terminology he didn't understand. The kind-faced man answered each query patiently, his gentle manner putting Harry increasingly at ease. Finally, Ragnarok announced that the tribunal would deliberate. The central floor was cleared as the three goblin judges retired to a chamber behind the dais, accompanied by Amelia Bones and two senior Wisengamot members who would observe but not participate in the deliberations. "How long will they take?" Harry asked Remus as conversation broke out around the chamber. "Not long, I expect," Remus replied grimly. "The evidence is overwhelming, and goblin justice tends to be swift and decisive." Indeed, barely 20 minutes passed before the judges returned, their expressions solemn as they took their places. Ragnarok called for silence, the gong sounding once more to bring the proceedings to order. "This tribunal has reached a unanimous decision," Ragnarok announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent chamber. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, please rise for the verdict." Dumbledore stood, his posture straight and dignified despite the gravity of the moment. "Albus Dumbledore, you have been found guilty of all charges brought against you in relation to heir Harry James Potter." Ragnarok's voice was stern and uncompromising. "The tribunal acknowledges that your actions may have been motivated by a desire to protect the boy, particularly in light of the prophecy revealed during your testimony. However, good intentions do not excuse the harm caused by your actions, nor do they justify the violations of magical law and inheritance rights." Ragnarok unrolled a scroll, reading the sentence formally. "For these crimes, this tribunal imposes the following penalties. First, you are immediately removed as Harry Potter's magical guardian, with all associated powers and privileges revoked. Second, you are fined 1,000,000 galleons in personal reparations to heir Potter, to be held in trust until he reaches his majority. Third, you are barred from holding any position within the Wizengamot or International Confederation of Wizards for a period of not less than 5 years. Murmurs swept through the audience at the severity of these penalties, particularly the enormous financial reparation, which would significantly reduce even Dumbledore's considerable personal fortune. Furthermore, Ragnarok continued, your continued position as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry will be subject to review by the school's Board of Governors, with whom we have shared our findings. You will be prohibited from making any decisions, magical or otherwise, regarding Harry Potter's education, housing, or welfare. Any attempt to circumvent these restrictions will result in immediate arrest and further penalties. Dumbledore bowed his head in acceptance. I understand and accept the tribunal's decision, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite its softness. May I be permitted to address Harry Potter directly before these proceedings conclude? Ragnarok looked to Harry. Harry Potter, do you wish to hear what Albus Dumbledore has to say? Harry hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Proceed, Ragnarok instructed Dumbledore, but be brief. Dumbledore turned to face Harry, his blue eyes no longer twinkling but filled with genuine remorse. Harry, no apology can undo the harm I have caused you, however well-intentioned my actions may have been. I placed the greater good above your individual welfare, believing that your survival was paramount even at the cost of your happiness. I was wrong. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I hope that in time, you might find it in your heart to understand, if not forgive, the choices I made. And I give you my solemn word that I will do everything in my power to support your transition to a better life with your godfather, without interfering or attempting to control your future in any way. Harry met the old wizard's gaze steadily, finding himself able to acknowledge the sincerity in Dumbledore's apology without forgiving the years of suffering it could never erase. He nodded once, accepting the words without offering absolution. Seeming to understand this silent response, Dumbledore bowed deeply to Harry before turning back to face the tribunal. This concludes the formal proceedings against Albus Dumbledore, Ragnarok declared. We will now address the matter of Harry Potter's guardianship. At a signal from Ragnarok, a side door opened, and 2 goblins entered, supporting between them a gaunt, hollow-eyed man whose black hair hung in limp waves around his too-thin face. Despite his haggard appearance, there was a fierce light in his grey eyes as they swept the chamber, finally coming to rest on Harry. Lord Sirius Black, Ragnarok announced, rightful guardian of heir Harry James Potter as designated in the will of James and Lily Potter, please approach the central floor. Remus squeezed Harry's shoulder. That's Sirius, he whispered. Your godfather. Harry stared at the emaciated man who was making his way slowly to the center of the chamber, leaning heavily on a cane. This was his godfather? The man his parents had chosen to raise him if anything happened to them? He looked more like a walking skeleton than a guardian. Yet as Sirius reached the center of the chamber and turned toward Harry, the fierce love and determination in his eyes was unmistakable. Despite his weakened state, he stood straight, his gaze never wavering from Harry's face. Harry, he said, his voice raspy from disuse but filled with emotion. You look so much like your father, but you have your mother's eyes. Those words, the same ones Remus had spoken, broke something loose inside Harry. This man had known his parents, had loved them, had been willing to die for them. And he had spent 4 years in a terrible prison for a crime he didn't commit, all while Harry suffered at the Dursleys. Without conscious thought, Harry slipped from his chair and crossed the floor to stand before Sirius. The chamber around them faded away, the hundreds of watching eyes forgotten as godfather and godson truly saw each other for the first time in 4 years. Hello, Harry, Sirius said softly, crouching down despite the obvious pain it caused him, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. The last time I saw you, you were just a year old. You used to ride around on my back when I transformed into a dog. You can turn into a dog? Harry asked, eyes widening. A ghost of a smile crossed Sirius's gaunt features. Not right now, I'm still too weak. But yes. Your dad could turn into a stag. We learned how to do it together, at Hogwarts. Can I learn too? Sirius's smile grew more genuine. When you're older, if you still want to. It's very advanced magic. There was an awkward pause, neither quite knowing what to say next. Then Harry blurted out the question that had been nagging at him since he'd learned of Sirius's existence. Why didn't you come for me? After you got out of prison? Pain flashed across Sirius's face. I haven't been out of prison until yesterday, Harry. I was there for 4 years, with no trial, no chance to tell anyone the truth. If I had known what was happening to you at the Dursleys, nothing in this world could have kept me from coming for you. Nothing. The raw sincerity in his godfather's voice broke through the last of Harry's reserve. Without warning, he threw himself forward, wrapping his arms around Sirius's thin neck in a fierce hug. After a moment of surprise, Sirius returned the embrace, holding Harry as though he were the most precious thing in the world. I promise, Harry, he whispered fiercely into the boy's messy hair, I will never let anyone hurt you again. Never. Their embrace was interrupted by Ragnarok clearing his throat. If I may continue with the formal proceedings, he said, though his tone was gentler than before. Sirius released Harry reluctantly, though he kept one hand on the boy's shoulder as they faced the Goblin Tribunal. Lord Black, due to your current physical condition resulting from your illegal imprisonment, you are unable to immediately assume full guardianship duties for Heir Potter, Ragnarok stated. However, as his rightful guardian named in his parents' will, you retain the legal right to make decisions regarding his care and education until you are able to provide direct supervision. Is this understanding acceptable to you? It is, Sirius confirmed, his voice stronger than before. Though I intend to recover as quickly as possible. Excellent. The Goblins of Gringotts have granted Heir Potter temporary sanctuary within our walls until more permanent arrangements can be made. Do you wish this arrangement to continue? Sirius glanced down at Harry, then back to Ragnarok. I am grateful for the protection Gringotts has provided Harry. However, I believe a more home-like environment would be beneficial for his continued recovery and education. He straightened to his full height, calling upon the dignity of his noble house despite his weakened state. As Lord Black, I hereby request the assistance of the Goblin Nation in establishing a suitable residence for my godson, with appropriate wards and protections befitting his status and the unique dangers he faces. Ragnarok considered this request, then nodded. Gringotts will provide warding services and security consultations for whatever property you select. Our healers will also continue to monitor both your recovery and Heir Potter's adjustment following the removal of the magical bindings. Thank you, Director Ragnarok, Sirius said formally. Your nation's assistance in this matter will not be forgotten by House Black or House Potter. Ragnarok seemed satisfied with this acknowledgement. Then I declare these proceedings concluded. May magic honor justice done this day. The gong sounded one final time, signaling the end of the trial. As the assembly began to disperse, Remus joined Harry and Sirius in the center of the chamber. Well done, Padfoot, he said warmly, clasping his old friend's shoulder. You looked every inch the Lord Black just now. Had to dredge up all those pure-blood manners my mother beat into me, Sirius grimaced, though there was a hint of pride in his voice. Worth it, though. The goblins respect proper protocol. He looked down at Harry, who was still standing close to his side. What do you think, Harry? Ready for a new adventure? Harry considered the question seriously. Everything was happening so quickly. Just 4 days ago, he had been a lonely boy in a cupboard, and now he was a wizard heir with a godfather, a family legacy, and a future suddenly rich with possibilities. I think, he said carefully, that I'd like to learn everything. About magic, about my parents, about being a Potter. He looked up at Sirius hopefully. Will you teach me? Sirius's laugh was rusty from disuse but genuinely warm. I'll teach you everything I know, pup. And what I can't teach you, we'll find the best tutors in the wizarding world to handle. His expression grew more serious. "But the most important thing I want to teach you is something your parents valued above all else: how to be a good person. Brave like your father, kind like your mother, and true to yourself no matter what." "We both will," Remus added gently. "And we'll tell you stories about your parents, not just that they were brave and died to protect you, but the small things. How your father couldn't cook to save his life but insisted on making breakfast every Sunday. How your mother sang terribly off-key but with such enthusiasm that no one had the heart to tell her." Harry felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling so unfamiliar it took him a moment to recognize it as happiness, pure, uncomplicated happiness. For the first time in his memory, he wasn't unwanted or unloved. He had people who genuinely cared about him, who wanted him not for his fame or his inheritance, but simply because he was Harry. As they left the chamber together, Harry walking between Sirius and Remus, he couldn't help but wonder what his life might have been like if his aunt had taken him to Gringotts years earlier. But then he pushed the thought aside. The past couldn't be changed, but the future stretched before him, suddenly bright with promise. And for the first time, Harry Potter looked forward to tomorrow with hope. Chapter 3, Freedom's Price. The ancient manor house stood proudly atop a gentle hill overlooking the Scottish coast, its weathered stone walls gleaming golden in the late afternoon sunlight. Lily's Haven, named by James Potter as a wedding gift to his bride, had remained empty for nearly 5 years, protected by layers of magic that had kept it pristine despite its long abandonment. Now, life was returning to the estate. Harry Potter stood at the edge of a bluff near the manor, the salty wind whipping through his hair as he gazed out at the steely waters of the North Sea. Behind him, teams of goblins, curse breakers, and security specialists swarmed over the property, reinforcing ancient wards and adding new protections to what would soon become his home. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice asked from beside him. Harry turned to find Sirius leaning on his cane, his gaunt face turned toward the horizon. Though still painfully thin, his godfather had improved remarkably in the 2 weeks since Dumbledore's trial. The shadow of Azkaban lingered in his eyes, but there were moments, like now, when it receded, allowing glimpses of the man he had once been. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen," Harry agreed honestly. The wild, rugged coastline with its dramatic cliffs and crashing waves couldn't have been more different from the sterile conformity of Privet Drive. "Your mother loved it here," Sirius told him, carefully lowering himself to sit on a flat rock nearby. "James bought it as a surprise just before their wedding. Lily cried when she saw it, said she'd always dreamed of living by the sea." "They never got to live here, though," Harry said quietly, sitting cross-legged on the grass beside his godfather's rock. It wasn't a question. Remus had already explained that his parents had moved to Godric's Hollow to implement Dumbledore's Fidelius charm protection. Sirius shook his head, regret etching deeper lines in his already haggard face. "No. The war was intensifying. Voldemort was hunting them actively. This place was meant to be there, after, where they'd raise you once the danger had passed." He gestured toward the sprawling manor. "Your mother had already decorated your nursery. It's still there, untouched." Harry's chest tightened at this tangible evidence of his parents' hopes and plans, their belief in a future they would never see. Can we look at it later?" "Of course, pup." Sirius reached out, gently ruffling Harry's hair. The casual affection still startled Harry sometimes, but he was gradually growing accustomed to it, even learning to welcome it. "We can look at anything you want. This is your home now." "Our home," Harry corrected firmly. In the short time he'd known his godfather, he'd learned that Sirius needed these gentle reminders that he belonged somewhere too, that he wasn't alone anymore. A wan smile crossed Sirius's face. "Our home," he agreed. The sound of footsteps on the grassy path behind them announced Remus's approach. Harry had quickly grown fond of his father's other best friend, whose quiet kindness and patient explanations had helped make the whirlwind transition to wizarding life less overwhelming. "The warding team reports they're nearly finished with the outer perimeter," Remus informed them, his amber eyes scanning the horizon habitually, "a protective instinct Harry had noticed he never fully relaxed. Andromeda and Ted should be arriving soon to help with the interior preparations. And Creature? Sirius asked, his expression souring slightly at the mention of the cantankerous house elf he'd reluctantly called from his family's ancestral home to assist with the manor's restoration. Remus's mouth twitched with suppressed amusement. Currently engaged in what I can only describe as a territorial dispute with the manor's resident house elves. Apparently, having been dormant for years, they're rather enthusiastic about serving the young master and don't appreciate Creature's assumption of authority. Sirius groaned. Marvelous. Exactly what we need, domestic warfare among the household staff. I've never met a house elf before this week, Harry commented, still trying to wrap his mind around the concept of the small, big-eared creatures who seem to simultaneously revere and frustrate his godfather. Are they all so intense? House elves live to serve wizarding families, Remus explained. For them, it's not just work, it's their entire purpose. The elves here at Lily's Haven have been without a Potter to serve for nearly 5 years. Having you here is like... He paused, searching for an analogy Harry would understand, like giving water to someone who's been in a desert. And Creature, Sirius added with a grimace, is from a very different type of wizarding household. The Blacks have traditionally been, well, not the nicest family, to put it mildly. Their values have influenced Creature's behavior. Then why bring him here? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Sirius rarely spoke of his own family, but what little he'd shared had made it clear that he had no love for his dark legacy. Sirius's expression was complicated, part disgust, part resignation. Because, unfortunately, he's bound to me as the last Black, and leaving him alone at Grimmauld Place with nothing but my mother's portrait for company would only make him more unhinged. Besides, he added with a hint of his old mischievous grin, it's rather amusing watching the Potter elves teach him some proper manners. A sharp crack interrupted their conversation as a house elf appeared before them, bowing so low that his long nose nearly touched the grass. Unlike Creature's dirty pillowcase, this elf wore what appeared to be a small, neat toga made from forest green fabric emblazoned with the Potter crest. Master Harry, sir. Visitors be arriving at the gates. Mistress Andromeda and Master Ted, they is coming with many trunks and packages. Thank you, Pippy, Harry replied, still somewhat uncomfortable with the elf's eager subservience but understanding from Remus's gentle coaching that showing respect was the kindest approach. Please show them to the main house. We'll be right there. The elf's already enormous eyes widened further at being addressed so politely by his master. Yes, Master Harry. Right away, Master Harry. With another sharp crack, he disappeared. Sirius levered himself up from the rock, his movements still stiff but improving daily under the goblin healer's care. Come on then, pup. Time to meet your new tutors, and my favorite cousin. They made their way back to the manor along a winding path that cut through wild gardens now being tamed by another team of magical landscapers. Harry still marveled at the sheer size of the estate. The main house alone was larger than the Dursleys' entire neighborhood, with dozens of rooms, multiple wings, and what Remus had called respectable library, though nothing compared to what you'll find at Hogwarts. As they approached the main entrance, Harry saw a witch and wizard being enthusiastically greeted by the house elves. The witch was tall and elegant with dark hair streaked with silver, bearing a striking resemblance to Sirius despite her healthier appearance. The wizard beside her was solidly built with a kind face and light brown hair. Andy! Sirius called, his pace quickening despite his lingering weakness. Ted! You made it! Andromeda Tonks turned at the sound of her cousin's voice, her aristocratic features softening with affection. Sirius, you look better, she said tactfully, embracing him carefully. Still far too thin, but there's color in your face now. Better than death warmed over, you mean? Sirius quipped, though his tight hug betrayed his genuine pleasure at seeing her. How's my favorite little metamorphmagus? Devastated that we wouldn't let her skip school to come meet the famous Harry Potter, Ted Tonks replied with a good-natured chuckle, shaking Sirius's hand warmly before turning his attention to Harry. "Speaking of whom, hello there, young man. I'm Ted Tonks, and this is my wife Andromeda. We're delighted to meet you at last." Harry, still unused to meeting new people in the wizarding world, stepped forward somewhat shyly. "Hello, sir. Ma'am. Thank you for coming to help us." Andromeda's eyes, the same gray as Sirius's but warmer, less shadowed by pain, studied Harry with interest. "He has Lily's eyes exactly," she murmured, "but otherwise, he's James to the life." She crouched down, bringing herself to Harry's eye level. "Your mother was a remarkable witch, Harry. I didn't know her well, I was several years ahead at Hogwarts, but we worked together briefly during the war. Her kindness and brilliance were legendary." "Everyone says that," Harry said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "That I look like my dad but have my mum's eyes. That they were brave and brilliant and kind. But I don't really know anything about them, not really." Rather than being offended by his tone, Andromeda nodded understanding. "Of course you don't. And generic platitudes, however well-meant, are poor substitutes for genuine memories." She straightened up, a determined expression crossing her aristocratic features. "Well, we'll just have to remedy that, won't we? I've brought photographs, letters, and several pensive memories that might interest you." "Pensive memories?" Harry asked, unfamiliar with the term. "A way of viewing other people's memories," Remus explained. "The pensive itself is a magical device that allows others to see events exactly as the memory owner experienced them." Harry's eyes widened. "You mean, I could see my parents? Actually see them moving and talking?" "Through our memories, yes," Sirius confirmed, his voice gentling at Harry's obvious emotion. "It's not the same as having your own memories of them, pup, but it's something." "It's everything," Harry whispered. An awkward silence followed, broken by Ted clearing his throat. "Well, we've brought more than memories. The Goblins sent us a list of requirements for the young heir's education, and we've acquired quite the library of texts to get started." His kind eyes twinkled as he regarded Harry. "I understand you've had a rather interrupted Muggle education thus far. We'll need to assess your current knowledge level in both magical and non-magical subjects." The mention of education reminded Harry of something he'd been meaning to ask. "Mr. Tonks, since you're Muggleborn, does that mean you know about things like maths and science and history? Not just wizard history, but regular history?" Ted looked pleasantly surprised by the question. "Indeed I do, Harry. I actually maintained my Muggle education alongside my magical one, took my A-levels through a correspondence course while at Hogwarts, then completed a university degree part-time afterward." Ted was quite the educational rebel in his day, Andromeda added with fond exasperation. Insisted that abandoning Muggle knowledge entirely was intellectual sabotage and refused to conform to the pure-blood notion that Muggle subjects were worthless. "They're not worthless," Harry said firmly, thinking of the books he'd occasionally smuggled from the school library to read by torchlight in his cupboard. "I want to learn everything, not just magic." "A man after my own heart," Ted declared with a broad smile. "We'll make sure your education is comprehensive, Harry. Magic is wonderful, but it doesn't negate the value of understanding mathematics, science, literature, and history. In fact, many magical disciplines are enhanced by Muggle knowledge. Arithmancy is built on mathematical principles, potions requires understanding of chemistry, and so on. And believe me," Andromeda added dryly, "you'll appreciate having a rounded education when you encounter some of the more traditionally minded students at Hogwarts who can't make simple calculations without magical assistance." The house elves, who had been patiently waiting during this exchange, now began levitating the numerous trunks and packages the Tonkses had brought. Pippi stepped forward importantly. "Pippi has prepared the East Wing guest suites for Mistress Andromeda and Master Ted, and the blue study has been converted to a classroom as requested." "Where should Pippi be putting all the books and learning materials?" "The blue study for now, Pippi," Remus instructed. "We'll sort through everything after dinner." As they made their way into the manor, Harry found himself walking beside Andromeda, whose keen eyes missed nothing as she assessed the ancestral Potter home. "You know," she said conversationally, "my daughter Nymphadora is quite eager to meet you. She's a first year at Hogwarts now, Hufflepuff, much to my mother's posthumous horror, but she'll be home for the Christmas holidays in a few weeks. She's a metamorphmagus, can change her appearance at will. I think you'd find her entertaining." "I'd like to meet her," Harry replied sincerely. The concept of having friends his own age was still novel. Dudley had ensured no one at his Muggle school ever dared befriend him. "Fair warning, she prefers to be called Tonks. Use her first name at your peril," Andromeda advised with a wry smile. "She's also spectacularly clumsy despite having the magical ability to control her entire physical form. One of life's little ironies." As they entered the grand foyer with its soaring ceiling and magnificent chandelier, Harry was struck again by how different this life was from everything he had known before. Just 3 weeks ago, he had been sleeping in a cupboard, wearing Dudley's cast-offs, and eating whatever scraps the Dursleys deigned to give him. Now he was the heir to a noble house, living in a manor, about to begin a specialized magical education with private tutors. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. "You look thoughtful, Harry," Remus observed quietly as the group paused in the foyer. "It's just a lot," Harry admitted. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and be back in the cupboard, and all of this will have been a dream." Remus's expression softened with understanding. "That's perfectly natural after what you've been through. But I promise you, this is real. And while there will be challenges ahead, nothing worth having comes without them. You will never return to that cupboard. Never." The quiet conviction in Remus's voice was comforting. Harry nodded, squaring his shoulders as he followed the adults toward the manor's east wing, determined to embrace this new reality with all the courage he could muster. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Harry settled into a new routine. Each morning began with healing sessions. Goblin healers still visited daily to monitor his progress as his body continued to recover from the magical bindings that had constrained him for years. Then came lessons with Andromeda and Ted, covering both magical theory and Muggle subjects. Afternoons were often devoted to what Sirius called proper air training, learning about wizarding culture, politics, and the responsibilities that came with being the last Potter. Evenings were Harry's favorite time. After dinner, they would gather in the manor's comfortable library where Sirius and Remus would share stories about his parents, sometimes supplemented by pensive memories that allowed Harry to actually see James and Lily as they had been, young, vibrant, and so clearly in love with each other and their baby son. Through these memories, Harry began to construct a mental image of his parents that went beyond platitudes about their bravery and kindness. He learned that his father had been hopeless at potions but brilliant at transfiguration, that he'd played a position called chaser on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and that he'd spent 3 years trying to win Lily Evans' attention before finally succeeding in their 7th year. He learned that his mother had been not only kind but fiercely determined, with a temper that matched her red hair when provoked. She'd excelled at charms and potions, stood up to bullies regardless of house affiliations, and maintained friendships with several Muggles from her hometown throughout her Hogwarts years. Most precious of all were the memories of himself with his parents, being tossed in the air by his father while his mother pretended to scold James for being reckless, sitting on Lily's lap as she read magical storybooks that had illustrations that moved, riding on Sirius's back in dog form while James and Lily laughed at his delighted squeals. "They really loved me," Harry said wonderingly one evening after emerging from a particularly emotional memory of his first birthday party. "More than anything in the world," Sirius confirmed, his voice rough with remembered grief. "Your father used to say that everything he did, fighting in the war, defying Voldemort, all of it, was to make a better world for you to grow up in. And your mother," Remus added softly, researched protection charms constantly in those final months. "She knew Voldemort was hunting you specifically because of the prophecy. Her last act of love created the blood protection that saved your life." Harry traced the lightning bolt scar on his forehead thoughtfully. It had faded considerably since the Horcrux removal, now appearing as little more than a thin silver line. The goblin healers had explained that it would never disappear completely. It was, after all, the mark of surviving a killing curse, but without the dark magic festering within it, it would continue to diminish over time. "Do you think they'd be proud of me?" he asked suddenly, voicing a worry that had lingered despite all reassurances. I'm not very brave or special. The Dursleys always said I was a burden, a freak." The flash of fury that crossed Sirius's face was frightening in its intensity. Though he was gradually recovering, gaining weight and strength, there were moments when the shadow of Azkaban darkened his features, revealing the damage those years had wrought on his psyche. "The Dursleys," he growled, "are the worst sort of muggles imaginable. Nothing they told you about yourself was true, Harry. Nothing." "Sirius is right," Remus said more gently, shooting a warning glance at his friend. "And as for whether James and Lily would be proud of you, Harry, they would be bursting with pride. You're an extraordinarily resilient, kind-hearted boy who endured years of neglect without becoming bitter or cruel. That alone would make them proud." "Besides," Andromeda interjected from her armchair near the fire, where she had been quietly reading, "you're only 5 years old, Harry. You don't need to be brave or special or extraordinary yet. You just need to be a child, something you haven't really been allowed to be until now." Harry considered this perspective, finding comfort in the idea that perhaps he didn't need to live up to some impossible standard of heroism at his age. Still, there was one aspect of his situation that continued to trouble him. "But the prophecy," he said hesitantly. "The one Dumbledore mentioned at the trial. It said I have to face Voldemort someday." The adults exchanged concerned glances. They had hoped to shield Harry from this burden a while longer, but the boy's natural intelligence and the public nature of Dumbledore's trial had made complete protection impossible. "The prophecy," Sirius said carefully, "is open to interpretation. And even if it does mean you'll face Voldemort someday, that day is not today, or tomorrow, or any time soon. Our job, mine, Remus's, Andy's, Ted's, is to make sure that if that day ever comes, you're prepared. Not just magically, but emotionally, mentally, in every way possible. And you won't face him alone," Remus added firmly. "Whatever happens, you will have people beside you, supporting you, fighting alongside you. Which is more than Dumbledore planned for you," Andromeda muttered, not quite under her breath. When the others looked at her, she raised an eyebrow unapologetically. "Well, it's true, isn't it?" The man's entire strategy seemed to be, keep the boy weak, isolated, and ignorant until it's time to point him at the Dark Lord like a living weapon. "Andy," Ted cautioned, glancing at Harry, perhaps not the most helpful observation at the moment. "No, she's right," Harry said quietly. That's what he was doing. He admitted it under the truth serum. He looked up at Sirius and Remus. "That's why I need to learn everything I can now, while there's time. I don't want to be anyone's weapon, but I don't want to be helpless either." The fierce determination in the small boy's voice was so reminiscent of Lily Evans that Sirius felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You won't be helpless, pup," he promised. "Not ever again." The conversation might have continued in this serious vein had the library door not burst open at that moment, admitting a harassed-looking house elf who was attempting to restrain what appeared to be an animated letter that was flapping its paper wings vigorously. "Master Harry. Pippi is sorry, but the letter is insisting," the elf exclaimed, finally releasing the missive, which immediately zoomed across the room and hovered in front of Harry's face, forming itself into a crude mouth. "Watcher, Harry Potter," the letter bellowed in a girl's enthusiastic voice. "I'm Tonks, well, Nymphadora Tonks, but if you call me Nymphadora I'll hex you when I'm home for Christmas, which is in exactly 16 days, not that I'm counting or anything. Mum says you're living with them now and that you've never had any proper friends because you were stuck with horrible muggles, which is just awful, so I've decided we're going to be best friends and I'm going to teach you everything about Hogwarts and magic and stuff. I'm in Hufflepuff, which is the best house and no matter what anyone says, and, Nymphadora Tonks. Andromeda interrupted, her wand out and pointed at the letter. Volume control, if you please. The letter seemed to wilt slightly. Sorry, Mum, it continued at a more reasonable volume. Anyway, Harry, I can't wait to meet you at Christmas. I've got loads to tell you about Hogwarts, and Charlie Weasley said he might come visit with his brother Bill, and they're brilliant. Charlie's mad about dragons and Bill's a curse breaker in training, and maybe you can meet them too. Oh, and I'm learning how to change my nose into different animal shapes. Want to see when I get home? Anyway, got to go, Professor Sprout's coming and I'm supposed to be writing an essay on Devil's Snare, not sending talking letters. See you at Christmas. The letter gave a final flutter and then folded itself neatly on Harry's lap. Well, Sirius said into the stunned silence that followed, his lips twitching with suppressed laughter, I believe you've just had your first introduction to my little cousin once removed. Subtle, isn't she? That was a talking letter, Harry said, picking up the now inert parchment with fascination. A howler, technically, Ted explained, though usually they're used for angry messages, not enthusiastic friend-making attempts. Dora must have modified it somehow. She's always been creative with her magic, Andromeda sighed, though her expression was more proud than exasperated. Though her professors might prefer if she directed that creativity toward her actual classwork occasionally. Harry found himself grinning at the thought of the exuberant girl who had sent such an unconventional greeting. She seems nice, he offered. Different from what I expected. Different is Nymphadora's specialty, Andromeda replied dryly. You should see what she can do with her hair color when she's excited. The full rainbow is considered restrained. The light-hearted moment was a welcome shift from the heavier topics they'd been discussing, and as the evening progressed with more stories and shared memories, Harry felt another small piece of his heart healing. Here, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him, the shadows of his past seemed less daunting, the challenges of his future less overwhelming. For perhaps the first time in his life, Harry Potter felt not just safe, but truly at home. Miles away, in a castle perched on a cliff overlooking a vast lake, Albus Dumbledore sat alone in his office, the weight of recent events heavy on his aged shoulders. The trinkets and silver instruments that had once whirred and puffed on his desk, many of them tied to monitoring charms on Harry Potter, were now still and silent, their magic nullified by the Goblin Tribunal's sanctions. The Board of Governors had met the previous day to discuss his continued tenure as headmaster. It had been a close vote, but ultimately his decades of service to the school and the lack of direct harm to any Hogwarts student had tipped the balance in his favor. He would remain headmaster, though under probation and with restrictions on his authority regarding certain school matters. A small mercy, but one he did not take for granted. The soft trill of Fawkes from his perch by the window provided a moment of comfort. The Phoenix had remained loyal despite everything, a constant reminder that redemption was always possible, even after the gravest mistakes. I know, old friend, Dumbledore murmured, stroking the bird's brilliant plumage. I have much to atone for. The castle clock struck 9, and Dumbledore sighed, rising from his chair. The students had departed that morning for the Christmas holidays, leaving the castle eerily quiet. Tonight, he had arranged to meet with Minerva McGonagall and Severus Snape, the two staff members whose trust he most needed to rebuild if he was to have any hope of effectively leading the school in the challenging years ahead. He made his way to the small sitting room adjoining his office, where a modest fire burned in the hearth and 3 comfortable armchairs awaited. Barely had he seated himself when a sharp knock announced Minerva's arrival. Enter, he called, bracing himself for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Minerva McGonagall had never been one to hide her feelings, and tonight was no exception. Her disapproval radiated from her rigid posture as she entered, her Scottish brogue more pronounced than usual as she acknowledged him with a curt, Albus. Thank you for coming, Minerva, he replied gently. Would you care for tea? I would care for explanations, she retorted, though she did take the offered seat. Starting with why you felt it necessary to lie to me about Harry Potter's welfare for 4 years. Dumbledore sighed. I did not lie, precisely. I told you he was safe, which he was, from Voldemort and his followers, at least. Don't split hairs with me, Albus Dumbledore, Minerva snapped. I told you those muggles were the worst sort imaginable. I watched them for a day and could see what kind of people they were. Yet you left an innocent child on their doorstep with nothing but a letter, then assured me for years that all was well. A cupboard, Albus. They kept the boy in a cupboard. The pain in her voice cut deeper than any anger could have. Minerva had always had a soft spot for the students in her care, particularly those who faced hardship. You are right to be angry, Minerva, he acknowledged quietly. I made a terrible mistake in not monitoring Harry's situation more closely. I was so focused on the blood protection, on keeping him hidden from those who would harm him magically, that I failed to protect him from more mundane cruelties. A second knock at the door prevented Minerva from responding. Severus Snape entered, his sallow face impassive as he nodded to both of them before taking the third chair. Severus, Dumbledore greeted him. Thank you for joining us. You requested my presence, Snape replied neutrally. Though I fail to see what contribution I can make to a discussion about Potter's welfare. Something flashed in Minerva's eyes. Perhaps you might contribute the perspective of someone who knows what it is to be an abused child, Severus. Or have you conveniently forgotten your own childhood while preparing to despise James Potter's son? Snape's face tightened, but before he could deliver what would undoubtedly have been a caustic retort, Dumbledore raised a placating hand. Please, both of you. We have serious matters to discuss, and recriminations, however justified, will not serve our purpose tonight. He fixed each of them with a solemn gaze. The landscape has changed dramatically. Harry Potter is no longer the isolated, magically suppressed child I had planned for him to be upon entering Hogwarts. He is now the recognized heir to House Potter, living with his legal guardian Sirius Black, and receiving an education that will likely make him one of the most prepared first years Hogwarts has seen in generations. Good, Minerva said firmly. The boy deserves every advantage after what he's endured. Perhaps, Dumbledore conceded. But it complicates matters significantly regarding the prophecy and Voldemort's eventual return. Harry is now surrounded by people fiercely devoted to his welfare, none of whom have reason to trust my judgment or guidance. Can you blame them? Minerva demanded. You bound the boy's magic, Albus. You suppressed his intelligence, interfered with his health, all while claiming to be protecting him. I did what I thought necessary at the time, Dumbledore replied wearily. The connection between Harry and Voldemort through that scar, through the Horcrux, was something I did not fully understand. I feared that as Harry's magic developed, so too might that connection, potentially giving Voldemort access to the boy's mind or magic. And now the goblins have removed it, Snape observed, speaking for the first time since the initial exchange. This, Horcrux. Using blood magic, according to the reports. Yes. A solution I had not considered possible. Dumbledore's expression was troubled. It changes everything, yet nothing. The prophecy remains. Voldemort will return. And when he does, he will seek out Harry Potter to finish what he began that Halloween night. So your concern is not for the boy's welfare, but for your ability to control him when the time comes, Snape concluded with characteristic bluntness. Dumbledore flinched slightly at the harsh assessment. Not control, Severus. Guide. Prepare. The Harry who will now come to Hogwarts will be very different from the one I anticipated, confident, knowledgeable about his place in our world, and surrounded by protective adults who view me as an enemy. Perhaps you should have considered that before making decisions that led to a goblin tribunal, Minerva remarked acerbically. Indeed, Dumbledore acknowledged. But what's done is done. The question now is, how do we move forward? How do we prepare, not just Harry, but all of our students for the challenges that lie ahead? Voldemort's return will affect everyone, not just the boy who lived. A contemplative silence fell over the room as each considered the implications of this statement. It was Snape who finally broke it, his dark eyes unreadable as he studied the headmaster. "You wish to regain their trust," he observed. "Black, Lupin, the boy. You believe the coming conflict will require unified resistance, and that cannot happen if the supposed leader of the light is viewed as a manipulative old man who sacrifices children for the greater good." Dumbledore inclined his head, neither confirming nor denying the assessment. "What would you suggest, Severus?" Snape's thin lips curled in what might have been a mirthless smile. "I suggest you do something completely foreign to your nature, headmaster. Tell the truth. The complete truth, without strategic omissions or manipulative framing. Lay your cards on the table and allow others to decide whether they wish to play the game by your rules." "Severus is right," Minerva said, looking faintly surprised to be agreeing with the potion's master. "If you have any hope of rebuilding trust, it must begin with absolute transparency. No more secrets, no more schemes, no more, for the greater good, justifications for questionable actions." "And if they reject me entirely?" Dumbledore asked quietly. "If they decide my guidance is not worth the risk of my past mistakes?" "Then you will have to accept that consequence," Minerva replied firmly. "As you accepted the Goblin Tribunal's verdict. Some prices must be paid, Albus, even by you." The truth of her words settled heavily in the room. Dumbledore gazed into the fire, his ancient face lined with the weight of decades of decisions, some wise, some catastrophically misguided. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of resolve that had been absent before. "Very well. I shall request a meeting with Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, and young Harry, if they permit it. No more half-truths, no more manipulations. It is time, as you say, to lay all cards on the table." He looked up, meeting first Minerva's gaze, then Severus's. "And I would ask both of you to be present as well. As witnesses, as colleagues, and as people who have their own stakes in the coming conflict." Minerva nodded briskly. "I'll be there. Someone needs to ensure you don't fall back into old habits." Snape merely inclined his head slightly, his expression giving nothing away. As the meeting concluded and his colleagues departed, Dumbledore remained by the fire, contemplating the path ahead. Freedom from his old patterns of secrecy and manipulation would come at a price, the price of vulnerability, of admitting he did not have all the answers, of accepting that others might make better choices than he had. It was, perhaps, a price worth paying, if it meant Harry Potter would face his destiny with the full support of those who loved him, rather than as the isolated weapon Dumbledore had once envisioned. The question was whether Sirius Black, who had lost 4 years of his life to Azkaban due to Dumbledore's negligence, would even agree to such a meeting. And whether the boy whose childhood had been sacrificed on the altar of the greater good could ever look at Albus Dumbledore with anything but distrust. Only time would tell. Christmas at Lily's Haven was everything Harry had secretly dreamed of during his lonely holidays at Privet Drive. The manor was transformed with evergreen garlands, enchanted icicles that sparkled but never melted, and a massive fir tree in the main hall that nearly reached the vaulted ceiling. The house elves outdid themselves with festive decorations, their excitement at having a Potter in residence for the holiday making them almost manic in their enthusiasm. But the true magic of the season came from the people. Nymphadora Tonks had arrived like a whirlwind of energy, her hair cycling through Christmas colors, red, green, gold, and silver, as she explored the manor with Harry, showing off her metamorphmagus abilities and regaling him with tales of her first term at Hogwarts. "The moving staircases are brilliant," she informed him as they sat in the manor's kitchens, sampling Christmas biscuits fresh from the oven. "Except when you're late for class and they decide to change direction. Then they're evil incarnate." Harry, who had never had a friend his own age, let alone an older, magical one, was fascinated by everything Tonks told him about Hogwarts. He pestered her with questions about classes, professors, the different houses, and especially the enormous library Remus had mentioned. The library's massive, Tonks confirmed, her nose briefly transforming into a pig's snout when Harry laughed at her impression of the stern librarian Madame Pants. But honestly, I spend more time in the kitchens. The house elves there give you snacks if you're nice to them, and there's this brilliant Hufflepuff secret, we're right next to the kitchens, so midnight snacking is basically a house tradition. On Christmas Eve, more guests arrived, Ted's parents, eager to meet the boy their daughter-in-law was tutoring, Minerva McGonagall, bringing gifts and news from Hogwarts, and most surprisingly of all, two red-headed brothers introduced as Bill and Charlie Weasley. Weasley? Harry had repeated, remembering something from the inheritance test. There were loyalty compulsions keyed to a Weasley family. An awkward silence had fallen at his innocent comment, broken by Charlie, a stocky, good-natured boy of about 13, who looked confused rather than offended. Loyalty compulsions? What's he on about, Bill? Bill, the elder brother who was in his final year at Hogwarts, frowned thoughtfully. I think I know. Mum's been acting strange lately, ever since the news about Dumbledore's trial broke. Dad finally got her to admit that Dumbledore had approached them years ago about taking a special interest in Harry when he came to Hogwarts. Said it was important for him to have a proper wizarding family to guide him. Your mother is Molly Pruitt, isn't she? Sirius asked, his expression darkening. She was always close to Dumbledore during the war. Bill nodded. She and Dad both fought with the Order of the Phoenix, though Dad more behind the scenes. Mum's always had a bit of a blind spot where Dumbledore's concerned, thinks he can do no wrong. Well, that explains the compulsions, Remus murmured. He was setting up surrogate parents for Harry, ones who would be loyal to him and likely guide Harry according to his wishes. That's creepy, Tonks declared, her hair momentarily shifting to a disturbed gray before returning to festive red and green. Like, really creepy. Planning who someone's friends will be before they even get to school? My parents had nothing to do with it, Bill assured Harry quickly. Dad was furious when he found out. Said no one had the right to manipulate children's friendships, especially not using magic. We'd have been friends anyway, I reckon, Charlie added with an easy grin. Weasleys are a friendly lot. No compulsions needed. The potential awkwardness of the moment dissipated under Charlie's good-natured charm and Bill's obvious sincerity. By the time everyone gathered in the grand dining room for Christmas Eve dinner, the atmosphere was warm and festive, with conversation flowing freely among the eclectic group. Harry, seated between Sirius and Tonks, found himself unexpectedly emotional as he looked around the table. Just a few short weeks ago, he had been facing another miserable Christmas at the Dursleys, likely watching Dudley open dozens of presents while he received nothing but old socks or coat hangers. Now he was surrounded by people who genuinely seemed to enjoy his company, in a home that was truly his. All right there, pup? Sirius asked quietly, noticing Harry's momentary withdrawal from the conversation. Harry nodded, unable to put his feelings into words. Sirius seemed to understand anyway, his gaunt hand squeezing Harry's shoulder gently before returning to his meal. After dinner, as the adults relaxed with glasses of mulled wine and the younger ones played a raucous game of exploding snap in the corner, Minerva McGonagall approached Harry with a slightly hesitant expression that seemed at odds with her usual confident demeanor. Mr. Potter, she said formally, might I have a word with you? Privately? Curious, Harry followed her to a quiet alcove near one of the manor's many bay windows. Snow was falling gently outside, transforming the wild Scottish landscape into a winter wonderland. First, McGonagall began, I wish to apologize. Harry blinked in surprise. Apologize? For what, Professor? For not questioning Albus Dumbledore more thoroughly when he placed you with those people. The distaste in her voice when referring to the Dursleys was unmistakable. I had reservations, serious reservations, about their suitability as guardians. I observed them for an entire day before you were placed there, and I saw nothing to suggest they would provide a loving home for a magical child. Yet I allowed Albus to persuade me that it was necessary, that the blood protection outweighed all other concerns. She removed her square spectacles, pinching the bridge of her nose briefly before continuing. I should have checked on you. I should have insisted on regular welfare visits. I should have done something when no one seemed to know exactly how the boy who lived was being raised. My inaction contributed to your suffering, and for that, I am truly sorry. Harry was stunned by the heartfelt apology from this stern-looking witch he barely knew. It's okay, Professor. You couldn't have known. That is precisely the problem, Mr. Potter. I could have known, had I made the effort to find out. McGonagall replaced her spectacles, her expression resolute. I cannot change the past, but I can promise you this: when you come to Hogwarts, you will have my full support and protection. Not as the boy who lived, not as a weapon in Dumbledore's arsenal, but as James and Lily's son, a student in my care. Thank you, Harry said simply, touched by her sincerity. McGonagall's stern features softened slightly. Your mother was one of my favorite students, you know. Brilliant at transfiguration, though she preferred charms. And your father? A rare smile crossed her face. Well, James Potter was equal parts brilliant and infuriating. The number of detentions I assigned him and Mr. Black could fill a small book. Sirius says they were pranksters, Harry offered. That, McGonagall replied dryly, is putting it mildly. They called themselves the Marauders, your father, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and... She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the fourth name. Peter Pettigrew, Harry finished for her. The one who betrayed them to Voldemort. McGonagall winced slightly at the name but nodded. Yes. Though none of us suspected him at the time. He seemed so harmless. Sirius says that's why he was the perfect spy. Everyone underestimated him. Indeed. McGonagall seemed about to say more when they were interrupted by the arrival of a house elf bearing a silver salver with an official-looking letter. Master Harry, sir. An owl is bringing this letter just now. It is having the Hogwarts seal, sir. Harry accepted the letter with a questioning glance at McGonagall, who looked equally surprised. I didn't send anything, she said, frowning as Harry broke the wax seal bearing the Hogwarts crest. The letter was written in narrow, slanting handwriting on heavy parchment, to Heir Harry James Potter, Lord Sirius Black, and Mr. Remus John Lupin. I write to request a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss matters of grave importance regarding the prophecy, the future of the wizarding world, and my own grievous errors in judgment. I propose a neutral location of your choosing, with any witnesses or protections you deem necessary. It is time for complete transparency. No more half-truths, no more manipulations for the greater good. I offer full disclosure of everything I know regarding Lord Voldemort, the prophecy, and the challenges that lie ahead. I make no excuses for my past actions. I ask not for forgiveness, but for an opportunity to provide information that may be vital in the coming years. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape have agreed to attend as witnesses, should you accept this proposal. Please respond at your convenience. The owl will await your reply. Sincerely, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read the letter twice before wordlessly handing it to McGonagall, whose eyebrows rose progressively higher as she scanned its contents. Well, she said finally, it seems Albus has taken my advice for once. You knew about this? Harry asked. I knew he intended to request a meeting. I did not know the precise contents of the letter. She studied Harry's face carefully. What are your thoughts, Mr. Potter? Harry considered the question seriously. His initial impulse was to refuse, to say he wanted nothing more to do with the man who had orchestrated his miserable childhood. But another part of him, the part that had absorbed countless lessons from Andromeda about wizarding politics and from Ted about strategic thinking, recognized the potential value in such a meeting. I think, he said slowly, that we should hear what he has to say. Not because I trust him, but because we need information. About Voldemort, about the prophecy, about everything he knows that might help me, help us, prepare for whatever's coming. McGonagall's expression reflected surprised approval. That is a very mature perspective, Mr. Potter. Harry shrugged slightly. Sirius says knowledge is power. And Andromeda says only fools refuse useful intelligence, even from unreliable sources. Both wise perspectives, McGonagall acknowledged. Shall we share this with the others? Harry nodded, and together they rejoined the main group. The festive atmosphere dimmed somewhat as the letter was passed around, with reactions ranging from Sirius's outright fury to Remus's thoughtful concern. Absolutely not, Sirius declared, crumpling the letter in his fist. The man is banned from making decisions about Harry's welfare. This is clearly an attempt to worm his way back into a position of influence. Perhaps, Remus conceded, but consider what he's offering, Padfoot. Full disclosure about the prophecy, about Voldemort, information we need if we're to adequately prepare Harry for what lies ahead. We can find that information elsewhere, Sirius argued stubbornly. Can we, though? Ted interjected, his normally affable expression serious. Albus Dumbledore, whatever his many faults, has been researching Voldemort for decades. He was the only wizard Voldemort ever feared. His insights could be invaluable. Andromeda, who had been silently contemplating the situation, finally spoke. We should accept, she said decisively. But with conditions. The meeting will take place here, at Lily's Haven, where we control the wards and can set the terms. Dumbledore will come alone except for his named witnesses. He will agree to questioning under Veritaserum for specific, pre-agreed topics. And most importantly, she fixed her gaze on Harry, you, Harry, will have the final say in all matters discussed. If at any point you wish the meeting to end, it ends. No questions asked. Sirius still looked mutinous, but as he glanced at Harry's determined expression, his resistance wavered. You really want to do this, pup? He asked quietly. Face him again after everything he did? Harry nodded firmly. I want to know everything he knows. And I want him to know that he doesn't control me anymore, that whatever happens in the future, it will be because I choose it, not because he manipulated me into it. Pride flickered in Sirius's gray eyes, momentarily displacing the shadows of Azkaban. Merlin, you sound like your mother when you talk like that. Lily always did have a steel backbone beneath that kind exterior. He sighed, running a hand through his still too thin hair. All right. We'll meet with the old manipulator. But Andy's conditions stand, and I'll be adding a few of my own. As will I, Remus added grimly. Dumbledore will find we're not so easily managed this time around. As plans for the meeting began to take shape around him, Harry felt a curious mixture of apprehension and determination. The path ahead would not be easy, not with prophecies and dark lords and complicated political machinations to navigate. But unlike before, he would face these challenges with knowledge, with support, and with the freedom to make his own choices. And that, he was beginning to understand, was perhaps the most precious gift of all. The meeting with Dumbledore was scheduled for the day after Boxing Day, allowing the Christmas celebrations to continue undisturbed. When the appointed time arrived, Lily's Haven was prepared as though for a diplomatic summit rather than a simple conversation. The manor's formal receiving room had been arranged with careful attention to symbolism and power dynamics. A semicircular table faced the entrance, with Harry seated at its center, flanked by Sirius and Remus. Andromeda and Ted positioned themselves on either side of this core group, with Bill Weasley present as a representative of a younger generation that would be affected by the coming conflict. Minerva McGonagall had returned to Hogwarts the previous evening to accompany Dumbledore and Snape, ensuring the headmaster adhered to the agreed-upon conditions. As the appointed hour struck, the manor's wards shimmered briefly, announcing the arrival of guests at the outer boundaries. "They're here," Remus confirmed, his heightened werewolf senses detecting the newcomers even before the house elf appeared to announce them. Harry straightened in his chair, suddenly aware that despite all the preparations and discussions, he was about to face the man who had shaped, or rather, misshaped, his early life. The man who, according to prophecy, would still play some role in his future. "Remember," Sirius murmured beside him, "you have all the power here, Harry. This is your home, your meeting, your terms." The doors opened to admit the three professors. McGonagall entered first, her expression professionally neutral though she offered Harry a small, encouraging nod. Snape followed, his sallow face impassive as his dark eyes swept the room in a single assessing glance. And finally, Dumbledore himself, looking somehow diminished without his usual colorful robes. He wore simple blue robes with minimal ornamentation, and his signature half-moon spectacles caught the light as he paused in the doorway, taking in the formal arrangement of the receiving room. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Harry greeted him, his young voice steady in the hushed room. "Professors. Thank you for coming." Dumbledore inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Herr Potter. Lord Black. Mr. Lupin. Please be seated," Harry continued, indicating the three chairs placed opposite their semicircular table. "As agreed, this meeting will proceed in three parts. First, you will provide information about the prophecy and Voldemort under Veritaserum. Then, we will discuss the implications and potential strategies without the influence of the Truth Serum. Finally, we will determine whether any ongoing communication or cooperation is warranted." If Dumbledore was surprised by the formality and structure of the meeting, or by hearing such precise language from a 5-year-old, he gave no sign of it. He merely took his seat with dignity, placing his hands calmly on the table before him. "I am ready to proceed as you have outlined," he confirmed. "I have brought the Veritaserum myself, certified by Professor Snape and tested for purity this morning." He placed a small crystal vial on the table. "I believe 3 drops is the standard dosage for full effectiveness." Remus reached for the vial. "If you don't mind, I'll administer it. Severus can confirm the proper dosage and effects, given his expertise in potions." Snape nodded curtly, his dark eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts on the proceedings. Remus carefully measured 3 drops onto Dumbledore's extended tongue, then stepped back to observe the effects. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Dumbledore's posture relaxed slightly, the twinkle in his blue eyes faded, and his expression became more neutral, almost blank. "Please state your name and current positions," Remus began, following the protocol they had established. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Former Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. Are you willing to answer truthfully about the prophecy concerning Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, the nature of Voldemort's survival, and your plans regarding Harry Potter's role in the conflict?" "Yes." "Then let's begin with the prophecy. Please recite it in full." Dumbledore repeated the prophecy exactly as he had during the tribunal, his voice flat and emotionless under the influence of the Veritaserum. "When was this prophecy made, and by whom?" Sirius asked. "It was made by Sybil Trelawney during a job interview at the Hog's Head Inn in early 1980. I was interviewing her for the position of divination professor at Hogwarts." "Was anyone else present?" "Not for the entire prophecy, no. However, a Death Eater, later identified as Severus Snape, overheard the beginning of the prophecy before being discovered and ejected from the premises by Aberforth Dumbledore, the proprietor." All eyes turned briefly to Snape, whose expression remained carefully controlled despite the revelation. Harry studied the potion's master with new interest, realizing for the first time that this sallow-faced, dour man had played a direct role in the events that led to his parents' deaths. What portion of the prophecy did Snape overhear and report to Voldemort? Remus continued, keeping the questioning on track. "Only the first part, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies." He did not hear the rest, including the part about the Dark Lord marking the child as his equal. Why did Voldemort target the Potters specifically? Were there other children who fit the prophecy's description? Yes, one other, Neville Longbottom, son of Frank and Alice Longbottom, also born as July ended to parents who had thrice defied Voldemort. Why Voldemort chose Harry Potter over Neville Longbottom, I cannot say with absolute certainty. However, I believe it may have been because Harry, like Voldemort himself, was a half-blood, whereas the Longbottoms were purebloods. Harry absorbed this information with a strange sense of detachment. Another boy might have been targeted instead of him. Another family might have been destroyed. The randomness of it all, how a single choice by Voldemort had determined the course of so many lives, was almost impossible to comprehend. Moving to the matter of Voldemort's survival, Andromeda interjected. How did he survive the backfiring of the killing curse that night? Voldemort created Horcruxes, multiple Horcruxes, to anchor his soul to the mortal plane. When the killing curse rebounded upon him, his body was destroyed, but the piece of his soul that remained in his primary form was able to flee as a wraith-like entity, less than a ghost but still possessing consciousness and limited abilities. Gasps and murmurs broke out around the table. Even Snape, who had maintained his impassive facade until now, looked shocked at this revelation. Horcruxes? Ted repeated, his scholarly interest evident despite the horrific subject matter. As in plural? How many? I believe he intended to create 7, as it is a magically powerful number. How many he actually created before his fall, I cannot say with certainty. I have confirmed too, a diary entrusted to Lucius Malfoy, and the fragment that was embedded in Harry's scar. I have suspicions about others but have not yet located them. The fragment in Harry's scar, you knew it was there all along? Sirius demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Yes. And you left it there? For 4 years? Yes. I believed it could not be removed without killing Harry. All my research into Horcruxes indicated that the host vessel must be destroyed to eliminate the soul fragment. The Goblins' use of blood magic to extract it without harm to Harry was unexpected. A solution I had not considered possible. Sirius looked like he wanted to leap across the table and strangle Dumbledore with his bare hands, Veritaserum or no Veritaserum. Remus placed a restraining hand on his friend's arm, silently urging him to maintain control. Let's return to the Horcruxes, Harry said, his young voice cutting through the tension. How can they be destroyed? And where might the others be located? Under the influence of the Truth Serum, Dumbledore provided a detailed explanation of Horcrux destruction methods, confirming that basilisk venom, fiendfire, and apparently goblin blood magic were among the few known substances capable of destroying such dark artifacts. He also shared his theories about the possible locations of other Horcruxes and the significance of items that might have been used. I believe he would have chosen items of symbolic importance, Dumbledore explained. The diary was his first, created while still at Hogwarts using the death of Myrtle Warren. For others, he likely sought items connected to the Hogwarts founders, whom he revered as the greatest wizards and witches of their age. Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, something of Ravenclaw's, these are among the artifacts I suspect he targeted. And Gryffindor? Bill asked. The only known relic of Godric Gryffindor is the sword, which is safely stored at Hogwarts and has been since the founders' time. It is also imbued with goblin magic that would likely reject any attempt to use it as a Horcrux. I believe he never acquired a Gryffindor artifact. The questioning continued for over an hour, covering Voldemort's history, his capabilities, his known followers, and his likely strategies upon returning to power. Throughout it all, Harry listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification but mostly allowing the adults to guide the interrogation. Despite the complexity of the discussion, he found himself following it with a clarity of understanding that would have been impossible before the removal of Dumbledore's intelligence inhibitor. Finally, Andromeda indicated that they had covered the major topics planned for the Veritaserum portion of the meeting. Is there anything else of critical importance regarding Voldemort or the prophecy that we have not asked about? She inquired as a final question. Yes, Dumbledore replied, still under the potion's influence. The connection between Harry and Voldemort goes beyond the Horcrux. The prophecy states that either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. This suggests a destined confrontation between them that cannot be avoided or circumvented by others' actions. Furthermore, the phrase, "he will have power the Dark Lord knows not," indicates that Harry possesses or will develop capabilities beyond Voldemort's understanding. I believe this power may be related to love, the emotion Voldemort has never understood and consistently underestimates. A thoughtful silence followed this revelation. Remus administered the antidote to the Veritaserum, and they watched as awareness returned to Dumbledore's eyes, his posture straightening slightly as he regained control of himself. "Thank you for your honesty," Harry said formally, once the headmaster had fully recovered. "We will now proceed to the discussion portion of our meeting." Dumbledore inclined his head. "Before we continue, might I ask a question of my own?" When Harry nodded, he continued, "How much of what I've shared today was already known to you?" "Some, but not all," Sirius answered. "The Goblins identified the Horcrux in Harry's scar and successfully removed it, but they didn't know there were others. We knew the basic outline of the prophecy from your testimony at the tribunal, but not your interpretation of it or the full context of how it was made and reported. The most valuable information," Remus added, "was about the potential locations and nature of the other Horcruxes. That gives us something tangible to work with, a way to actively prepare for Voldemort's eventual return rather than simply waiting and reacting." Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully. "And that, I believe, is the crux of why I requested this meeting. The approach I took previously, keeping Harry isolated and uninformed until the critical moment, was fundamentally flawed. I see that now. But the alternative is not to simply abandon him to face his destiny without guidance or support." "No one is suggesting abandoning Harry," Ted said firmly. "Quite the opposite. We're establishing a network of support and education that will ensure he enters this conflict, if and when it comes, with every possible advantage. But without the burden of being solely responsible for defeating Voldemort," Andromeda added, her grey eyes sharp as they fixed on Dumbledore. "The prophecy may state that Harry has a unique role to play, but that doesn't mean he must fight alone. Nor does it mean his entire childhood should be sacrificed to preparation for that role." "A balance," Dumbledore murmured, nodding slowly. "Yes, I see the wisdom in that approach. Harry must be prepared but also allowed to develop normally, to experience joy and friendship and all the things that make life worth fighting for." He turned his gaze to Harry. "That was my greatest error, I think. In focusing so intently on your survival, I neglected to consider your happiness, the very thing that would give survival meaning." Harry studied the old wizard thoughtfully. Without the anger and betrayal that had colored their previous interactions, he could see more clearly the weight of responsibility Dumbledore carried, the burden of knowledge about Voldemort's return, about the Horcruxes, about the coming war. It didn't excuse what the headmaster had done, but it helped Harry understand the context of his decisions. "I think," Harry said carefully, "that we all want the same thing, for Voldemort to be defeated permanently, with as little loss of life as possible. We just disagree about how to achieve that." Dumbledore's blue eyes widened slightly at the maturity of this assessment coming from a 5-year-old. "Precisely, Harry. And I believe your current path, education, support, preparation without isolation, may indeed be superior to my original plan. I underestimated the importance of love and connection in building the strength needed for such a confrontation. So where do we go from here?" Sirius asked bluntly. "You've shared what you know. We've shared our approach. What role, if any, do you see for yourself in Harry's future?" It was the question they had all been circling, and Dumbledore considered it carefully before responding. "I would like to offer my knowledge and resources in the hunt for the remaining Horcruxes. This is a task that requires specific expertise and access to information that few others possess. I would also like to maintain some advisory role regarding Harry's magical education, though I understand and respect that all final decisions rest with Lord Black as his guardian." He paused, then continued with evident sincerity. "Most importantly, I would like the opportunity to earn back some measure of trust, not through manipulation or control, but through transparent communication and genuine support. When Harry comes to Hogwarts, he should be able to see me as a headmaster who respects his autonomy, not as an enemy to be feared or a puppet master pulling strings." The room fell silent as everyone considered this proposition. It was Bill Weasley who finally spoke, offering a perspective that bridged the generational divide. "I think Professor Dumbledore's knowledge is too valuable to dismiss entirely," he said thoughtfully. "But structure and boundaries would be essential. Perhaps regular meetings with Lord Black and Mr. Lupin present, focused specifically on Horcrux research and strategic planning. No private interactions with Harry until he's older and can better protect his own interests." "I agree," Remus said, surprising some with his support. Pushing Dumbledore away entirely would be satisfying emotionally but potentially detrimental strategically. "We need his knowledge, his connections, and his magical expertise. But every interaction must be transparent, every suggestion open to questioning and debate." Sirius still looked deeply skeptical, but he turned to Harry. "What do you think, pup? It's your future we're discussing. Your life that's been most affected by his decisions." Harry took his time answering, aware that his response would shape the path forward. Part of him wanted nothing more to do with Dumbledore, to declare that the man had forfeited any right to involvement in his life through his past actions. But another part, the practical, strategic thinker that Andromeda and Ted were nurturing, recognized the value in keeping Dumbledore as an ally, albeit a carefully managed one. "I think," he said finally, "that we should work with Professor Dumbledore on finding and destroying the Horcruxes. That's something specific and important that doesn't involve my day-to-day life or education. As for the rest..." He looked directly at Dumbledore. "I'm not ready to trust you yet. Maybe someday, but not now. When I come to Hogwarts, I'll be your student, and you'll be my headmaster. That relationship needs to be rebuilt from the beginning, without any expectations from the past." Dumbledore received this verdict with a solemn nod. "A fair and reasonable decision, Harry. I thank you for it, and for the opportunity it represents. Trust, once broken, must be re-earned through consistent actions over time. I understand and accept that challenge." The remainder of the meeting focused on practical arrangements, how information would be shared regarding Horcrux research, the frequency of updates, and the establishment of clear boundaries for Dumbledore's involvement. By the time the professors prepared to depart, a tentative framework for cooperation had been established, one that balanced caution with pragmatism, protection with preparation. As they rose to leave, Dumbledore paused, his gaze sweeping over the comfortable manor that had become Harry's home. "Lily would have been pleased to see you here," he said softly. "She loved this place from the moment James showed it to her. Said it felt like a true haven, hence the name." The personal observation, offered without any apparent agenda, caught Harry by surprise. "Did you visit them here?" he asked. "Once, shortly after they purchased it. Lily was planning the gardens, full of ideas for magical and muggle plants alike. James was designing a Quidditch pitch beyond that ridge." Dumbledore gestured toward the window, where the winter landscape stretched toward distant hills. "They spoke of the future with such hope, even in the midst of war. That hope, Harry, lives on in you." With that, he bowed respectfully to the assembled group and followed McGonagall and Snape from the room, leaving Harry with yet another piece of the puzzle that was his parents' life, and another perspective on the complicated wizard who had shaped so much of his destiny. Spring came to Lily's Haven in a riot of wildflowers and fresh green growth. The manor's extensive grounds, neglected for years, bloomed under the care of magical gardeners and Harry's own enthusiastic if amateur assistants. He had discovered, to his delight, that he enjoyed working with plants, perhaps, Remus suggested, a trait inherited from his mother, who had maintained an extensive herb garden for potions ingredients. Harry's education progressed at an impressive pace. With the magical bindings removed, his natural intelligence flourished, allowing him to absorb knowledge at a rate that sometimes startled even his tutors. By his 6th birthday in July, he was reading at a level typical of children twice his age, demonstrating a particular aptitude for magical theory, ancient runes, which Andromeda had included despite the subject typically being offered only to third-year Hogwarts students, and somewhat to everyone's surprise, cooking. "It's like potions," Harry explained when Ted commented on his enthusiasm in the kitchen, "but you get to eat the results, and they don't explode if you make a mistake." Physical changes accompanied his intellectual development. The stunted growth caused by years of poor nutrition and magical suppression began to correct itself, and by summer's end, Harry had gained several inches in height and lost the too thin, fragile look that had characterized him upon leaving the Dursleys. Regular meals, sunshine, exercise, and the lingering effects of the goblin healing rituals combined to transform him into a healthy, active child with boundless energy and curiosity. Sirius, too, continued to recover, though his progress was slower and less consistent. There were good days when glimpses of the charming, mischievous man he had once been shone through, and bad days when the shadows of Azkaban seemed to engulf him, leaving him withdrawn and hollow-eyed. On those days, Harry would often find him in dog form, curled up in patches of sunlight or beside the fire, the simpler canine mind better able to cope with the lingering trauma of the Dementor's influence. Regular visits from Tonks, who insisted on teaching Harry to fly despite Andromeda's concerns about his age, brought laughter and chaos to the manor. The young metamorphmagus had adopted Harry as a surrogate little brother, regaling him with tales of Hogwarts and promising to show him all the secret passages, when he eventually attended. Bill and Charlie Weasley visited during their summer holidays, bringing along their younger siblings for what became regular Quidditch matches on the pitch that Sirius had finally built in fulfillment of James's original plans. Harry, who had inherited his father's natural flying ability, took to the sport with immediate enthusiasm, though Andromeda insisted he master the basics before attempting any of the reckless stunts Charlie tried to teach him. Through it all, the shadow of Voldemort's eventual return remained a constant undercurrent. Updates from Dumbledore arrived regularly, detailing progress in researching possible Horcrux locations. A team of curse breakers, led by a now-graduated Bill Weasley, who had accepted a position with Gringotts specifically to gain expertise relevant to the Horcrux hunt, worked in concert with the headmaster's efforts, though actual recovery missions were still in the planning stages. On the last day of summer, as golden light bathed the coastal cliffs in warm hues, Harry and Sirius sat together on their favorite bluff, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. It had become a ritual for them, these quiet moments away from the bustle of tutors, visitors, and daily lessons. "Happy, pup?" Sirius asked, his arm draped casually around Harry's shoulders. Harry nodded, leaning comfortably against his godfather's side. "Very happy. I just wish." "What?" Sirius prompted gently when Harry trailed off. "I wish my parents could see this. See us together like they wanted." Sirius tightened his arm around Harry, his own thoughts drifting to James and Lily. "They can see us, Harry. I believe that with all my heart. And they're proud of you, so proud of the person you're becoming. Do you think they'd be proud of my decision about Dumbledore? Working with him on the Horcruxes but keeping him at arm's length otherwise?" Sirius considered this carefully. "Your father might have wanted a more definitive break. James could hold a grudge when he felt it was justified." A small smile crossed his face at some remembered incident. "But your mother was more pragmatic. She'd have seen the strategic value in the arrangement you've established. And both of them would respect that you made the decision yourself, based on careful thought rather than pure emotion." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the distance, the lights of the manor twinkled warmly, promising comfort and companionship when they eventually returned. "We're going to find them all, you know," Sirius said suddenly. "The Horcruxes. Destroy every last one before Voldemort has a chance to fully return. Bill's team is close to locating the locket, and Dumbledore believes he's identified where the ring might be hidden. I know, Harry replied, his young voice nonetheless carrying the weight of understanding beyond his years. And if we don't, if he does come back before we find them all, we'll face him together. Not just you and me, but everyone who's helping us. That's right. Sirius ruffled Harry's perpetually messy hair, so like James's had been. Together. That's what your parents wanted most of all, for you to be surrounded by people who love you, who would stand with you no matter what. As night settled fully over the Scottish coast, Harry Potter, no longer the neglected boy in the cupboard under the stairs, but the well-loved heir to House Potter, gazed up at the stars with a heart full of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had led his aunt to Gringotts that fateful day. The path ahead might hold challenges and even dangers, but unlike the future Dumbledore had planned for him, Harry would face them with knowledge, with support, and most importantly, with the freedom to choose his own destiny. Not as a weapon or a sacrificial pawn, but as a young wizard surrounded by family of both blood and choice. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful magic of all. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.